Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Tommy Ray Morgan. I'm 31 years old, and this all happened in late October of 2023. I'd driven myself out to the Castle Rock Badlands in Gove County, Kansas, hoping for a quiet escape and some striking nighttime photos of the region's strange rock formations. It's still surreal to think about, given how unprepared I was for everything that followed. When I replay the events in my head, it's almost as if I'm remembering someone else's life. But it happened to me. Everything I'm about to tell you is real, or as real as this nightmare can be. I'm not a particularly brave or hardened man. I've never served in the military, never seen any real combat. I used to work as a mechanic in a small shop in Wichita, but a few months back I quit my job and started freelancing as a photographer to scratch a creative itch. My side gig gave me reasons to visit places I'd only ever seen in travel guides or random hiking forums. I'd heard about the Castle Rock Badlands for years, enough to know it was a remote region with bizarre rock towers rising from the plains. Tourists rarely went there. The photos I found online showed wind and water-sculpted hoodoos, a sense of desolation and harsh beauty that called to me in the way lonely places can. I thought it would make for an incredible photo essay, maybe help me land a piece in an outdoor magazine. I invited along my German shepherd, Bruno. He was 5 years old, a big, muscular dog who'd never let me down. We'd hiked plenty before, and he gave me a sense of security in the open wilderness. It was just going to be me, Bruno, and the stars, until a friend from high school caught wind of my plan. Nick Devlin was someone I'd been close to back in the day. We'd lost touch for a bit, but he saw my post on social media about heading out to Castle Rock and reached out. I felt a brief flicker of hesitation when he asked if he could come along. It wasn't that I disliked Nick. I'd simply grown used to my own company and the dogs, but there was still enough nostalgia from high school days to make me say yes. Nick was 33, a bit older than me, and carried himself with this air of easy confidence that sometimes felt like arrogance. He was charismatic, though, and people gravitated to him. Part of me hoped it would be nice to have company, to reminisce about the old days, maybe even get a few good laughs around the campfire. I arrived first, pulling my ancient Subaru off a dirt road near the towering spire that gave Castle Rock its name. Kansas is mostly known for flat landscapes and farmland, but out in Gove County, the ground can suddenly drop into gullies and ravines, exposing layers of sedimentary rock. The formations around Castle Rock stand like broken monoliths. It's a place that can feel unnervingly still. The air smelled of dust, sharp sage, and the faint tang of salt. I parked the car just before sunset, let Bruno out, and started scouting for a spot to set up camp. The plan was simple. We'd meet, pitch tents, gather some firewood, and spend a few nights in the area while I captured the raw beauty of the landscape. I wanted to photograph the towers at sunrise, at dusk, and under a full moon. That's where the trouble started. There was a rumor in an obscure hiking forum I'd read about a haunted cave near Castle Rock, but I'd written it off as local legend. The mention of glowing carvings and bones was surely someone's attempt at a ghost story. I only half believed it, at least at first. Nick arrived in a cloud of dust, driving a sturdy pickup. He hopped out, brushed the road from his jeans, and greeted me with a smile that seemed almost too eager. Bruno, normally sociable enough, trotted up to Nick but held back, sniffing and letting out a faint huff. I should have paid more attention to that reaction. Bruno was never outright aggressive to new people, but his posture, tail down, ears half-cocked, told me something was off. "Guess he's not used to me," Nick said, shrugging it off. "He'll warm up," I replied, forcing a friendly laugh. Nick and I set up our camp just off to one side of a lonely cottonwood tree, the only hint of green in that dusty place. The sun was going down, and the shadows that stretched across the Badlands looked almost liquid. We found a spot for a fire ring and soon had tents pitched. Bruno paced the perimeter, occasionally whining. I chalked it up to him being antsy from the long drive, but in hindsight he was probably warning me of everything to come. Night fell fast, and that first evening started ominous enough. The wind felt electric, gusting in from nowhere. A half-moon perched in the sky, surrounded by dull clouds that painted shapes against the stone pillars. Nick tossed a log onto the campfire, and that's when the first strange thing happened. The fire sputtered, shot up with a burst of bright green sparks, then died to a faint flicker. He tried again with the lighter, and it resisted, as if the wind was too strong. But I noticed the air around us was still. No wind battered our tents. It was as if the flame just didn't want to catch. Eventually, we coaxed the fire to life. The wood seemed dry, but the color of the flames kept shifting. Normal orange, then a ghostly blue, then back to orange. Nick joked about it, but a sinking feeling nestled in my gut. While we ate, we compared phone signals and realized we had none. That didn't surprise me. Castle Rock was remote. But by the time we finished our minimal dinner, some jerky, a little trail mix, and coffee, both our phone batteries were drained. That was more concerning. My phone had been nearly at full power when I got here. Now it was at 5%. Nick's was dead entirely. I tried to chalk it up to the cold or maybe a glitch, but it was definitely strange. We climbed into our tents around midnight. I settled into my sleeping bag with Bruno at my feet. The last thing I remember was the campfire still flickering outside and Nick humming to himself. I woke up sometime in the night to Bruno barking. His barks echoed off the rock pillars, bouncing in every direction. Dazed, I peered out of my tent. It looked pitch black except for a weird glow around the formation we'd camped beside. I saw movement. A shape scuttling across the dusty ground, like a hunched shadow sliding around the rocks. I blinked, and it was gone. Bruno was scratching at the tent flap to get out. I told him to calm down. He eventually did, though he spent the rest of the night restless, snapping awake at every noise. The next morning, I woke to find the campfire had died to smoldering ash. My arms were stiff, and I had a headache. I noticed something odd, too. My sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside, but laid open in a neat rectangle around me. I definitely hadn't done that. I was a curled-up sleeper, usually zipped to my chin. Bruno was outside, standing near the remains of the fire, ears pinned back. Nick was rummaging in his tent, cursing softly. "I think my water went bad," he said. He held up a half-full gallon jug, the inside fuzzy with green mold. "What the hell?" I checked my own jug. It was the same, some sort of algae or mold that had blossomed overnight, swirling in the water like spiderwebs. Our packaged food was rotting or crawling with small beetles. Even sealed-up, freeze-dried packs had been invaded. It all looked spoiled beyond salvage. There's no logical reason for that. The nights might be cool, but not so damp that everything would mold over in a matter of hours. And the insects, we'd sealed that food carefully. I felt a rush of nausea, both at the sight and at the thought of how. Nick looked at me with wide eyes. He didn't say anything, but the question was there. Do we pack up and leave? I'll admit, maybe we should have. But we'd come so far for this trip, and I was stubborn about getting the photographs I wanted. "Look," I said. "We can always drive to the nearest town and stock up again." Nick was quiet, then nodded. "Sure," he said. "Nearest town is an hour or so away. We can do that." We packed the ruined food away in a trash bag. Just to be safe, I kept my camera gear with me and locked my tent. The plan was to drive out, resupply, and come back. It was still morning, 8 or 9. The sun was up, shining bright. We hadn't even made it 10 steps toward the vehicles before Nick spotted the cave. It was a hole in the rock behind a cluster of boulders, partially hidden by a ridge. The opening was no bigger than a car tire, but you could see it widened inside. "That's weird," Nick said. "You want to check it out real quick?" We had the entire day. I told Bruno to stay close and we walked over. The entrance was jagged, like something had punched a hole into the hillside. Warm air trickled out, smelling like sulfur and decay. Instantly, Bruno began growling, his hackles raised. I could hear a low hum in my ears like distant chanting. It reminded me of a time I got too close to a beehive. This buzzing, insistent pressure. "Let's not do this," I said. My gut told me to walk away. "We'll come back after we get supplies." Nick was reluctant, but eventually we left the cave alone and marched back to the vehicles. That's when we discovered something else was off. My Subaru's battery was completely dead. Nick's pickup had power but refused to turn over. Each time we tried, the engine would make a grinding noise like it was out of alignment. He popped the hood, I checked the connections. Everything looked fine to me. But I'm a fair mechanic, and I knew that something deeper was wrong. "Feels like the engine's locked up," Nick said, a tremor in his voice. "It was working fine yesterday, I just drove out here." "We can't both have dead batteries and locked engines," I said. "That's insane, unless someone tampered with them overnight." Nick scowled. "Who?" We looked around the empty Badlands, seeing only dust and towering formations. A strange hush fell over us. I felt this creeping sense of dread. It was just so quiet, no birds, no insects, just the wind scraping against stone. Bruno barked, a small anxious sound. "All right," I said. "We might have to hike out." We debated for a while. The nearest town was about an hour's drive, which could be a full-day hike if we didn't have a good route. The main road was a few miles away, but even then, you might not see another vehicle for hours. We had limited water, no fresh food. It was a dire situation, but not impossible. Still, a day's trek in the bright Kansas sun with minimal supplies wasn't appealing. I wanted to check the area first, see if by some miracle we found a ranch or property. The topography made it tricky, though, and the printed map we had seemed wrong. The lines for roads and landmarks didn't match where we were standing. It was as if the land had shifted. Before we could form a real plan, Bruno began whining again, staring at that hole in the rock. Nick, agitated, said, "I'll just get some more firewood while you figure out how far the next ranch might be." He grabbed a small axe and stomped off toward a stand of scraggly trees about 100 yards away. I was too busy fiddling with the map to object. Bruno kept looking between me and the direction Nick had gone, but he stayed at my side. We had no phone service, no working vehicles, and apparently no sense of direction that made sense. Before I knew it, an hour had passed. Nick hadn't returned. I decided to go check on him. When I reached the stand of trees, I found chopped branches scattered on the ground. No Nick. I called his name. The only answer was the echo against the rocks. Then, from somewhere ahead, I heard a faint scraping noise. It led me up to a ridge. I climbed it, Bruno close behind, until I reached a vantage point overlooking a shallow ravine. That's when I saw Nick. He was standing near a rocky outcrop, holding the axe at his side. He was completely still. I let out a breath of relief, about to call to him, but he turned slowly, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. He was smiling, wide, too wide, I wasn't sure if he was even blinking. "Hey," I said, coming down the slope. "You okay?" He didn't reply, just kept smiling. Something was definitely wrong with his eyes. They seemed to have lost their usual spark. He stared at me for several seconds before speaking. "Hi, Tommy." The words sounded stiff, like reading from a script. I forced a laugh, stepping closer. "Man, I've been looking everywhere for you." He just nodded. Then he turned and pointed at something behind me, up the ridge. I followed his gaze, but all I saw were the same rocky formations. "What do you see?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to me and said, "We should go back to camp." I stepped toward him, noticing the axe blade was splattered with mud or maybe sap from the branches. "Yeah, let's go." I reached out to pat his shoulder, but he flinched. Bruno let out a low growl. Nick stared at my dog for a moment, then an odd grin flickered over his face. We made it back to camp in silence. I tried asking him what happened, but he dodged the questions, only giving one-word answers or that unnerving grin. I was starting to suspect a head injury or dehydration, but Nick's movements were too precise. Something about him was just off. It was still midday, though I couldn't be sure of the exact time because my watch was acting bizarrely. The second hand ticked forward erratically, then jumped backward. At a glance, it might have read 2:15, then the next glance read 12:10. Nick's watch was no better, and his phone was still dead. I decided we had to salvage as much as possible and start walking. I rummaged in my tent for a canteen or anything that might be salvageable. The day was hot, and we'd need water. The sun glared, but when I glanced at the sky, the position of the sun seemed too low for noon. Was it early morning again, or late afternoon? The shadows looked wrong. Short one moment, then stretched out the next. Bruno was panting, standing near the fire pit, which was cold now despite the sun. Nick stood by the car tapping his fingers on the hood, that same vacant smile plastered on his face. "We should stay," he said, as if to no one in particular. I shook my head, ignoring him. "I'm going to grab the rest of the gear. We'll carry what we can and—" "Stay," he repeated louder. "It's not time to go yet." His voice gave me chills. "Look, man, something's messed with our cars. Our food is gone. We can't stay. We'll die out here." He stared past me, blinking slowly. "We're not alone," he said. I followed his gaze. At first, I thought I saw a figure moving at the edge of the rocks. My heart skipped, but the shape vanished, and there was just stone and shadow. Bruno barked and whimpered, turning circles in place. Then Nick walked past me, brushing my shoulder with a cold hand. It felt like the heat from his body was gone. He was cold, despite the searing sun. He wandered over to the cave entrance we'd seen earlier. I realized with a jolt of alarm that it was no longer a narrow hole. It had widened, the edges worn smooth as if it had always been this way. "Nick," I called, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, gazing into the darkness. Bruno followed me as I approached, letting out a low whine. The buzzing sound returned in my ears. I swear the cave was breathing. A waft of stale air poured out, reeking of sulfur and rot. The sun above flickered momentarily, like a dying bulb. I even saw dust motes freeze midair, only to swirl again an instant later. Time felt wrong, bending and twisting with each breath. My stomach knotted, and I forced myself to speak. "Come on, Nick. Let's get away from there." He slowly turned to face me. "I found something inside," he said, in that hollow voice. "Bones. Carvings." He pointed a finger at me, or maybe at Bruno. I couldn't tell. His eyes were blank, yet his smile was so very wide. "It's waiting for us." I lost my temper, grabbed Nick's arm, and tried to drag him away from the cave. "Snap out of it." His body tensed. For a moment he resisted, then let out a hiss, practically baring his teeth. Bruno barked and lunged, nipping at Nick's leg. In a flash, Nick backhanded Bruno with more strength than I'd ever seen him use. Bruno yelped and tumbled onto the ground. I went to kneel by the dog, rage and concern flaring in me. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I shouted. Nick stood tall, eyes boring into me. There was no recognition or shame, just an eerie fascination. Bruno got up shakily, blood dripping from his snout. I screamed again at Nick, but he only replied in a garbled mumble of words that didn't sound like English. My body trembled with adrenaline and fear. I'd never seen someone act possessed. That's the only word for it. He turned and slithered into the cave, almost drawn by an invisible tether. My mind told me to run, get away from him. Instead, I shouted for him to stop, then followed as far as the entrance. The darkness inside was total, beyond what a simple lack of light could explain. My flashlight, which I'd grabbed from my tent, flickered weakly, barely piercing the black. Bruno whined at my heels, not wanting to go any further. That's when I realized how quiet it was. No wind, no echoes. Just the relentless buzzing in my ears. A shape in the darkness, Nick, or something wearing Nick's body, vanished further in. I lingered at the threshold, torn between trying to help my friend and saving my own skin. Bruno made the decision for me by yanking on my pant leg, pulling me backward. My dog's trembling told me enough. Going into that cave was suicide. I backed away, heart pounding, until we were back under the open sky. I glanced around, thinking to gather my things and flee, but leaving Nick behind felt wrong, even though it was clear something horrifying was happening to him. But panic overshadowed all else. That was the last moment I was purely myself. I stumbled back to the campsite, stomach tight and arms shaking. My mouth felt like sandpaper. If we were going to make a break for it on foot, I needed water, and I wanted my camera. If Nick was gone, or worse, I could still try to document something about this. Evidence, or proof that I wasn't crazy. I rummaged in my tent for the canteen I'd tucked away. It should have been sealed, but when I found it, there was a small hole near the cap, as if something had gnawed through. Inside was that same dark mold. Disgusted, I tossed the canteen aside. The buzzing in my ears grew louder. Bruno barked, staring at the far edge of the campsite. My heart jackhammered as I turned. Nick was back, looming by the solitary cottonwood. Except now, his clothes were torn and dusty. His grin was gone, replaced by an expression of cunning I'd never seen in him. "We should stay," he said again, quietly. Then he pointed a dirty finger at me. "We shouldn't have come here, Tommy. This place doesn't want you." I swallowed. "Nick, come on, let's just—" He raised the axe. I didn't even see him retrieve it, but there it was, clutched in his hands. "We'll stay." My mind raced. Bruno growled, but was clearly hurt and leery of approaching. "You're not acting like yourself," I managed. "Let's get help." He stepped forward. "Help?" I backed away, searching the ground for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes landed on the metal camp shovel near the remains of the fire ring. He must have seen my intention because he lunged at the same time. In the scramble, I tripped over a rock, and the blow from his axe missed me by inches, hitting the gravel with a dull thud. I rolled onto my back and scrambled for the shovel, brandishing it to block his next strike. Metal scraped metal, jarring my arms. His face twisted, eyes wide, spittle flecking his lips. This was no longer the Nick I knew. It was something else in his body. I kicked at his knee, unbalancing him for just a moment. Bruno darted in and bit at Nick's pant leg, but Nick twisted away with impossible agility. He turned and swung the axe down toward Bruno. Terror seized me. I jabbed with the shovel, knocking his arms aside, but he still clipped Bruno along the side. My dog yelped and rolled to the ground. Rage and fear consumed me. I swung the shovel sideways, connecting with Nick's head. The sound was sickening. A dull crack. He went down, the axe dropping from his hands. My breath sawed in and out of my lungs. Bruno whimpered. For a few seconds, Nick was sprawled on the ground, face half buried in dust. I stumbled to Bruno. A shallow cut ran along his ribs, bleeding but not too deep. My head swam with relief. Then I heard laughter. A wet, choked laugh. I looked back at Nick, who was pushing himself to his feet, blood streaming down his forehead. No normal person could stand after a blow like that, but he did, giggling like a madman. He looked at me with those hollow eyes. I raised the shovel, but he let out an inhuman hiss and sprinted back toward the cave. He disappeared into the yawning blackness as I stood there trembling, shovel clenched tight. I sank to my knees, heart pounding. Bruno whined, leaning against me. I tried to think rationally. Nick was gone again, taken by something inside that cave, or replaced. I needed to get away from this place. But the cars were dead. The nearest real road was a miles-long walk across desolate terrain. Worse yet, something was messing with time and space around us. The sun overhead flickered from high noon to a late afternoon glow in a matter of minutes. Shadows changed length whenever I wasn't looking. My thoughts turned desperate. Maybe there was a ranch or a farmhouse out here. The land wasn't exactly farmland, but I knew from the map that ranches dotted the region if you went far enough. Problem was, the map was useless. The topography didn't match, the roads didn't match. I felt like a rat in a maze, but I had to try. I rummaged quickly for anything salvageable. A water bottle from the Subaru's console, also moldy. Another from under the passenger seat, somehow still okay. I took a cautious sip. It tasted stale, but not rotten. I fed a little to Bruno, who was still trembling. With the shovel in one hand, water in the other, and my camera bag slung over my shoulder, I started walking. I tried heading east, guided by the position of the sun. Yet something about the horizon seemed to shift. I'd crest a ridge, thinking it would lead to open plains, only to see more pillars of stone. At one point, I realized I was looping back toward our original campsite. The Subaru and Nick's truck came into view. My mouth tasted of dust and adrenaline. The world spun in a slow, dizzy circle. The second time I tried, I veered north, carefully lining up the distant shapes. I walked for what felt like 2 hours. The heat pressed down, sweat pouring from my brow. Bruno limped beside me. Eventually, I reached a fence line. My heart soared. Fences meant property, which might mean people. But the fence was half buried, and it seemed to run in a crooked path around a formation of rocks. Worse, when I tried to follow it, it looped back on itself, leading me in a circle. I found a portion covered in old, dried vines, and stuck in those vines was something that made my breath catch in my throat. A child's doll, tattered and dirty, the porcelain face cracked. It didn't belong out here. I grabbed the doll, intending to throw it aside, and noticed it was seeping some black liquid from the cracks. Horrified, I dropped it. Bruno started growling again, hair bristling. I felt eyes on me, as if from behind the rocks. My nerve broke, and I ran. It was a stumbling, miserable run, with no direction, until I realized I was heading yet again toward the campsite. I stopped short. It was as if the place was pulling me back. By the time I approached the vehicles, it was late afternoon, judging by the slant of the light, though I couldn't trust it. My watch read 5:47, but it had read 12:10 only an hour ago. My head pounded, stomach roiled. I decided, in a moment of grim resolution, that I might need to investigate the cave to see if there was some explanation or some other exit on the far side. Maybe Nick was in there. maybe there was a chance to save him, or to kill whatever was controlling him so I could get out. I dropped my camera bag near my tent, keeping only the camera around my neck and the shovel in my hand. Bruno whimpered, but followed as I stood at the mouth of that unnaturally wide cave. It was larger now, tall enough for a person to walk in upright. The stench of rot and sulfur blasted me. My flashlight flickered again, faintly illuminating damp rock walls with strange spiral carvings. A wave of vertigo rocked me as I stepped inside. I felt as though the tunnel was tilting, pressing me to keep going. I took it slow, each step accompanied by Bruno's anxious whining. I scanned the walls with the flashlight beam. Old bones littered the ground, animal, possibly human. Skulls with runes carved into them. The buzzing in my ears intensified, turning into a faint, discordant chanting that made my teeth ache. The path twisted deeper. I tried to keep track of my turns, but time and distance were meaningless in that blackness. More than once I considered turning back, but a mixture of dread and desperation propelled me forward. Then I saw him. Nick stood at the far end of a small cavern, facing a curved wall. My flashlight caught his silhouette, hunched as though in prayer. Blood caked the side of his head. The axe was resting on the ground beside him. I could see his chest expand as he breathed, but the motion was unnatural, like convulsions. Bruno growled and stepped forward, but I signaled him to stay behind me. I forced my trembling legs to move until I was about 10 feet away. "Nick," I said softly, "can you hear me?" He turned around slowly. The beam of my flashlight revealed his face to be pallid, eyes wide. His lips parted, revealing a blackish substance in his mouth. It trickled down his chin. I fought the urge to vomit. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, voice crackling like broken glass. Then, in a single, predatory movement, he lunged for me. I barely got the shovel up in time. He snarled, his hands clawing at me. The flashlight hit the ground, spinning beams of light across the walls. Bruno charged in, snapping at Nick's ankles. The three of us tumbled onto the cave floor. Nick moved with terrifying speed, trying to grasp my throat. I swung the shovel blindly, catching him across the shoulder. My arms screamed with exertion. Then Bruno latched onto Nick's forearm, shaking violently. Nick howled, though it sounded less like a man and more like a beast. Black vapor hissed from the wounds. Panicked, I hammered at Nick's chest with the shovel handle. He coughed up more black fluid, his body convulsing. For an instant, I saw Nick's eyes return to normal. Startled, full of fear. "Tommy!" he croaked in a human voice. "Help me!" It shattered my heart. "I'm trying!" I cried, tears blurring my vision. I can't." He vomited more black substance, then let out a scream that shook the cavern walls. Bruno leapt aside, whimpering. Nick's body jerked and contorted, bones popping under his skin. I forced myself forward, pinned his thrashing arm with the shovel, and pulled out the small hunting knife I'd strapped to my belt. I didn't know what else to do. If something was inside him, maybe there was a way to free him. But the rational part of me knew that might be impossible. As I hovered, uncertain, Nick's face twisted in rage. He grabbed me by the collar and spat the foul liquid onto my cheek, burning my skin. I screamed, stabbing blindly downward. The blade sank in and he shrieked again, thrashing. The black vapor poured out, swirling around us. My eyes burned. A sense of unimaginable dread filled my chest. Nick gargled, going still for a moment. Then he gave a final violent spasm, hurling me off him. I crashed into the cave wall, head spinning. The flashlight clattered, rolling away. In the flickering beam, I saw Nick's body slump, but the black vapor remained, swirling around his torso like living smoke. It expanded, forming a vaguely human silhouette. Then it lunged across the cavern toward me. My mind screamed to run, but my legs were weak. Bruno barked and leapt between me and the vapor, snapping at it. The cloud recoiled, sliding back across the floor into Nick's body. Nick's eyes snapped open, a final hollow look. He let out a rattling breath that was almost a laugh, then collapsed. The axe was only a foot away from him, glinting in the wavering light. My heart hammered. I forced myself to approach and check his pulse. Nothing. He was limp, unmoving, and unbelievably cold. I felt tears streak down my face. Whatever or whoever Nick had been, he was gone now. Whether he'd truly been my friend for any of this, or if that thing had replaced him the moment he disappeared, I didn't know. But I just watched him die, maybe even killed him myself. The reality crushed me. I threw up in a corner of the cave, retching until my ribs hurt. Bruno hovered by my side, trembling. Blood matted his fur. We had to leave. The black vapor, or entity, or demon, whatever it was, still felt present. I sensed a malignant energy in the air. If we stayed, it would consume me too. I crawled over to retrieve the flashlight. My hands shook uncontrollably. As I stood, the chanting in my ears rose to a crescendo. The cave walls seemed to breathe, bulging inward. Panic flooded me. Then, with a thunderous crack, a portion of the ceiling collapsed. Chunks of rock rained down. I grabbed Bruno and stumbled away deeper into the cavern because the entrance behind us was blocked. We pressed forward through winding passages. My memory of this part is jumbled, like time was folding in on itself. Sometimes the cave was narrow and claustrophobic. Other times it opened into cathedrals of stone. Spirals and runes glowed on the walls, making me nauseous to look at. I saw flickers of what might have been the surface, only to round a corner and find endless darkness. My flashlight lasted far longer than its battery should have, or maybe it lasted no time at all. Time had become meaningless. At some point, I tripped into a hidden crevice and tumbled downward, scraping my arms and tearing my jeans. I landed in a shallow pool of stagnant water, the smell of decay overpowering. Bruno yelped above me, circling the edge, unable to find a safe way down. My flashlight flickered. I lifted it to see partial skeletons embedded in the cave walls, like a mass grave. Some were animals, others definitely human. Skulls stared back at me with hollow sockets. My trembling forced me to move, wading through the pool, searching for an exit. Eventually, I found a ledge and pulled myself up onto relatively dry rock. Bruno managed to scramble down behind me, whining. My breath was ragged. I was sure I'd die here, never seeing the surface again. And yet, something in me refused to quit. I'd watched Nick get consumed by that thing. I'd seen my dog injured. I couldn't let it end like this. Then, I saw a faint glow, a crack in the rock. Drawing closer, I realized it was sunlight. My hope soared. With renewed energy, I forced my stiff limbs to climb up. Each pull of my arms felt like knives in my shoulders. At last, I wedged my body through a jagged opening and emerged somewhere. I tumbled out onto the dusty ground in a burst of coughs, Bruno following behind me. We lay there, gasping. When I looked around, I realized we were only about 50 yards from our original campsite, near the place we'd parked the cars. The sun was nearly setting, painting the sky in violent reds and purples. My body ached in confusion. How had we ended up back here? The cave's entrance was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a jumbled series of collapsed rocks. The day I'd experienced inside might have only been minutes or hours. Or days. I had no concept of time. Bruno barked, drawing my attention to the Subaru and Nick's pickup. Everything looked the same as we'd left it. My tent still stood, the flaps open. The campfire ring was undisturbed. Blood still stained the ground where Nick had attacked me. But Nick's body wasn't there. For a second I panicked, certain he might appear again. But I heard nothing, saw nothing, just emptiness and endless rock. We stumbled to my Subaru, though I knew it likely wouldn't start. Still, I had to try. I popped the driver's door and turned the key. Nothing. I tried Nick's truck. Same grinding noise, no ignition. My phone was in the tent, so I grabbed it. Dead. The sense of entrapment was suffocating. Should I attempt to walk again? Would time loop me in circles? I slumped against the side of the Subaru, exhausted to the core. Bruno sat beside me, shivering. My arms felt numb. Cuts covered my hands. I stared at the horizon, watching the sun descend, painting everything in deepening shadows. And then, unbelievably, I saw headlights on the horizon, a dust plume behind them. I staggered upright, adrenaline spiking. A vehicle was approaching. I ran toward the road, waving my arms. Bruno barked, limping beside me. As the headlights drew closer, I realized it was some beat-up old truck with county plates. Relief washed over me, tears streaming down my cheeks. A single occupant, an older man in a ball cap, slowed to a stop in front of me. He rolled down the window, confusion etched on his face. "Son, you look half dead," he said. "You break down?" My voice came out cracked. "Yes, my friend he's gone. We got stuck." The old man's eyes flicked warily to the bloodstains on my clothes, the cuts on my arms. Bruno lay down on the ground, panting. Slowly, the man nodded. "I'll call for help." His truck's radio crackled, but it was full of static. Eventually, he gave me a ride into the nearest town. We left my Subaru, Nick's truck, and all our gear behind. On the drive, the old man asked questions, but I could barely speak, too shaken to form coherent answers. He gave Bruno water, rummaged behind his seat for a battered plastic bowl. My dog lapped it greedily. Everything after that is a haze. I got to a small clinic. Sheriff's deputies asked me about Nick, about what happened out there. I remember telling them he was missing. They organized a search. Over the next few days, I repeated my story countless times. Some details I left out, the black vapor, the chanting. Even saying we found a cave seemed unbelievable. Local authorities explored the site but reported no cave entrance that matched my description, just a collapsed area near the rock. They found my Subaru. No footprints leading away from the campsite except my own. There was no sign of Nick. They concluded Nick Devlin was missing, likely deceased. Maybe he fell into a ravine or a sinkhole. I kept telling them something else happened, but they only looked at me with pity. The official story is that my friend got lost or injured and probably died in the Badlands. They never found a body. Over time, I healed from the physical wounds. Bruno had stitches along his ribs. My nightmares, though, never faded. Even now, when I close my eyes, I smell that sulfur stench and hear that buzzing. For months, I was haunted by the feeling that time wasn't quite right, that I'd left a piece of myself in that cave. My phone's camera roll was all corrupted, the pictures unrecognizable static except for one shot, which I can't recall taking, a blurry image of Nick's face smiling too widely, staring right at the lens. It was a year ago, and I haven't set foot in Gove County since. Sometimes I'm terrified I'll see Nick, or something, wearing his shape in a passing crowd. I still hear his voice echo in my dreams. We should stay. And on nights when the air is too still, Bruno wakes, barking at a silent corner of the room, as if that black vapor has found us again. I don't know if the Castle Rock Badlands are cursed, haunted, or if there's some ancient entity dwelling in the earth below. All I know is it's real. I felt it. It killed my friend, or consumed him. Time twisted and folded on itself, and for all I know, it's still doing so out there among those lonely rock pillars. I sometimes wonder if I escaped because that place allowed me to, or if it just didn't want me as badly as it wanted Nick. Either way, I survived. I carry the scars inside and out. But I'll never truly be free, and if you're reading this, consider it a warning. Some places are beyond our understanding, and once you stumble into them, they change you forever. If you ever find yourself in Gove County, near Castle Rock, and you sense that emptiness, that breathless hush, turn around. Leave while you still can, because if you don't, you might never leave at all. My name is Jeremy Scott. I'm 34 years old. This happened in late August of 2023, and I still can't bring myself to fully believe it. When I close my eyes at night, though, I see everything again. The twisted silhouette of trees in the darkness, the luminous flicker of a campfire dancing in inhuman colors, and above all, the crooked figure of a woman whose face was sewn shut. I start at the beginning because I need to make sense of it, if any sense can be made at all. I grew up near Kansas City, and while I wasn't exactly an outdoorsman, I'd been on a handful of weekend hikes in my 20s. My friend Matt Collins and I used to explore hiking trails around the Midwest. He was always the confident one, bold, sometimes reckless, while I mostly followed behind him, cracking open a granola bar the second I felt a twinge of discomfort in my belly. We had a long-standing joke. Jeremy is the city slicker, Matt is the mountain man. But Matt's job had him traveling, and we barely saw each other in recent years. I was never in the military, never had survival training, just a casual outdoors interest, mostly gleaned from reading gear reviews and wilderness blogs. Matt teased me whenever I'd talk about merino wool socks or water purification tablets. "You read too much," he'd say. "Just come out and do it." So when my freelance graphic design workload got insane in July, I decided I needed a break. Maybe it was about proving to myself that I could do it alone, or maybe I just wanted solitude. I packed my gear, loaded my dog Ranger into my SUV, and texted Matt. Headed to Teeter Rock near the Flint Hills. Join if you can. He replied that same day, saying he would try to meet me there by the weekend. Ranger is a German Shepherd, 5 years old, loyal to a fault. He's typically quiet, but once he's onto a scent, he's unstoppable. I trusted him more than I trusted myself in the wild. We left in the early morning hours, the back of my car stuffed with a tent, sleeping bag, and dog food. As I rolled out, I felt that old giddy sense of possibility, the excitement of stepping outside my comfort zone. The Flint Hills region always intrigued me. Rolling hills, tall grass prairies, and remote scenic overlooks that never quite made it into the glossy travel brochures. Teeter Rock was one of those local secrets. A tall, limestone marker perched on a hill, originally used as a guide for pioneers. Or so the blog post said. The directions included some mention of unmarked roads and an unlisted footpath that branched off from a rarely used service trail. I shrugged off the red flags. I had a compass, a phone, and a GPS. I figured, how hard could it be? When we reached the sign for Teeter Rock, the clouds looked unnaturally low, swirling in the bright August sky. Ranger let out a short bark, as if urging me to keep moving. At the base, I found the wide trail leading to the main vantage point, but behind some tall grass, I noticed a narrower path heading east. The plan from the blog was to follow that hidden track for a couple of miles and camp near the black grove of ancient trees. Even as I started down that path, I felt a spasm of unease. The grass was waist-high in places, the trail more of a rumor in the land than an actual walkway. But the blog said it was scenic, quiet, perfect for a peaceful night. I wasn't ready to turn back. Right as I took my first steps on that faint trail, my phone vibrated. Matt had texted. "Got stuck working. Might not make it. Sorry, bud." Anger flickered through me. He was the one who originally told me about this side trail in the first place. Maybe I should have felt relieved. I wanted time alone. But there's comfort in having backup. The frustration passed, and I told myself, "You've got Ranger. You can handle this." We walked in silence for an hour, maybe more. My phone's navigation app kept glitching. It showed us teleporting across the map, jumping back to the highway, then drifting aimlessly. At first, it was almost funny. I had my compass, so I wasn't worried. But then the phone battery died from 70% to 0 in what felt like minutes. That was the first real sign. A small detail, but it gnawed at me. Why would a phone die that fast? I consulted my compass to confirm we were heading roughly east, but we seemed to be turning north. Strange. I tried not to overthink it. The path occasionally wound, so maybe I just missed a bend. Still, it was an unsettling thought. Losing your sense of direction in a place you barely know. Around midday, I reached a clearing ringed by black, gnarled trees. They looked uniform in height, each trunk twisted in an almost serpentine way. The bark was dark and thick, unlike any tree I'd seen in Kansas. A hush seemed to drape over the place. No wind, no crickets, no birds. I convinced myself it was simply a calm day. Ranger stared at the trees, head tilted, ears perked. He let out a low rumble in his throat, not quite a growl, more like confusion. I decided that was our campsite. Part of me felt uneasy, but another part was drawn to it. The ground around the trees looked soft and undisturbed, with enough flat space for a tent. I remember planting my small tent stake in the ground and noticing how easily it slid into the soil, like the dirt was loose or freshly turned. My mind churned. Shouldn't this ground be firmer? But the day had been long, and I was tired of second-guessing every detail. I told myself that it was convenient, at least. No hassle setting up camp. I tied Ranger to a length of rope that gave him freedom to sniff around, gave him water, and then set about collecting wood for the fire. For a while, normal tasks occupied me. Clearing the area of stones, laying out a ring of rocks for a fire pit, piling up kindling. The air felt heavier than usual, but I chalked it up to humidity. The sky was a strange color, swirling in an odd, purplish hue at the horizon. It was definitely later in the day than I'd expected, though my watch insisted it was only 4 in the afternoon. More than once, I flicked my watch with my finger, suspecting it was broken. As evening approached, I tried to use my phone again. No luck. Dead battery, no sign of life. I thought about how I'd told my mom I'd text her to confirm I'd arrived safely. That little nudge of guilt started, along with a pinch of anxiety about being so cut off. But there was nothing to do about it now. The sun sank quickly, and everything fell quiet. I lit the campfire. The flames licked the logs and glowed a comforting orange for a time until they suddenly flared a bright electric blue color. It was so abrupt, I nearly dropped the matches I was holding. Ranger reacted by barking and backing away. I stared, startled, but the flames soon shifted back to normal. I tried to convince myself it was some chemical in the wood or soil. Then a breeze shuddered through the trees, or maybe I imagined it, and the fire dimmed, sputtering out with a soft hiss like someone had exhaled over it. The only glow left was the dying ember beneath the ash. I rebuilt the fire quickly, adding more tinder, coaxing it back to life. This time, it stayed lit but burned with an odd, flickering intensity. Later, as I dozed off in my sleeping bag, I felt a sense of relief that the day was finally done. That maybe tomorrow I'd find a better route out. For all its strangeness, nothing had gone drastically wrong, not yet. I jolted awake in the middle of the night to a wet nose pressing against my ear. Ranger was trembling, letting out a series of low whines. My watch read 12:16. Outside, the fire had dwindled to embers. I looked around and realized I didn't remember falling asleep. My last memory was laying my head back to rest for what I thought was a minute. Grabbing my headlamp, I unzipped the tent to let Ranger out. He bolted the moment there was space, barking at something. My eyes followed him, but only saw the silent ring of black trees. Stepping out, I felt that the air was ice cold, in August. My breath came out in puffs, as though it were a frosty winter night. I scanned the perimeter with my headlamp. The tree's bark seemed to shine slickly. The wind was dead still, yet I felt a tickle on my neck like invisible threads pulling at me. That's when I heard it. A whisper in the distance, soft and cooing, almost maternal. I called Ranger's name, but he ignored me, still fixed on something in the darkness. There was nothing, no shape or reflection. Then, faintly, I heard my name. Jeremy. It sounded like my own voice calling me from deeper in the woods. My heart pounded as I swung my headlamp side to side. The second the beam hit one of the black trunks, I thought I saw a face in the bark. 2 hollows, like eyes. A slender line like a mouth. But when I blinked, it was just a tree. My pulse hammered in my ears and I felt silly, but fear was clenching my lungs. Ranger finally returned, tail tucked between his legs, sniffing me nervously. We climbed back into the tent together. Despite the cold, I was sweating. I checked my watch again. 12:16. It hadn't changed. Telling myself it was probably jammed or the battery was dying, I slid it off. My phone, also dead. A wave of futility hit me. I wanted to go back to sleep, but I lay awake for a long time listening to Ranger's uneasy breathing. When I woke again, sunlight spilled through the tent's thin fabric. My first coherent thought was that I'd actually slept through the night. Relief fizzled the moment I realized my sleeping bag was wide open. It had been unzipped from the inside, even though I distinctly remembered zipping it up with the intention of trapping some warmth. My body felt stiff, my muscles aching. Ranger was outside, attached to the rope, but it was slack and tangled around a tree trunk. I stepped out and discovered that all my firewood was gone. The ring of stones lay scattered, like something had kicked them aside. It was as if I hadn't built a fire at all. I tried to shrug it off as a weird dream, or maybe I'd done it in my sleep. My nerves started to fray, but I forced myself to maintain composure. Methodically, I made coffee with my propane stove, fed Ranger, then decided to check my supplies. That's when I nearly dropped my coffee mug. 3 of my water bottles were filled with a dark, oily liquid, not water. It smelled rancid, like diesel and sulfur. My packaged food looked moldy. I'd just bought that stuff brand new. The bread was furry with green spores, the jerky was slimy, everything in the cooler was lukewarm and stinking. My mouth went dry. That sense of rational explanation I'd clung to was eroding. Spoilage didn't happen that fast in normal conditions. I considered packing everything and leaving. The plan was to circle back to Teeter Rock, get in my SUV, and never look back. But that would mean at least an hour or 2 of hiking. Mentally, I tried to figure out the best route. The path I had used to get here was nearly invisible, swallowed by grass. My plan, I'd head west, guided by the morning sun at my back. Simple enough. I got my compass. It indicated north was in the exact direction I thought was west, as if everything had been turned on its side. I tapped it, shook it, hoping it was broken. Still, I decided to follow the sun. I stuffed my moldy supplies in a garbage bag, took what little water was uncontaminated, and headed out. An hour passed, maybe 2. I was trudging across the rolling hills, not truly on a trail at this point, just forging forward in what I believed was the direction of my car. The tall grass parted around me. Insects chirped. and occasionally Ranger whined. Then, cresting a small rise, I saw the grove of black trees again, like we'd looped in a circle. My mind stumbled. I'm not a novice. I know how to keep a heading. Yet here I was, right back to where I started. Only the clearing looked slightly different now. My tent was gone, my heart seized. I ran forward, and there, in the same patch of dirt I'd camped, I saw signs of a scuffle. Footprints, bits of cloth that looked suspiciously like my tent's fabric, and a half-buried stake. No tent, no spare gear. I scanned the area. Nothing. It was as if someone had stolen the entire campsite. I felt a wave of nausea, a sense that my mind was unraveling. Ranger began barking at the trees. I spun around and saw a shape at the edge of the grove. For a fleeting moment, it looked like a man. But as I blinked, it was gone. A few steps closer, and I glimpsed a figure again. This time, I recognized the face. Matt, standing a good 50 feet away, partially concealed by the black trunk of a tree. My heart soared with relief. "Matt!" I shouted. He didn't respond. He just stared, wearing an odd half-grin. Something in me shrank from his gaze. "Where's my tent? Did you move my stuff?" I took a step forward. Matt stepped backward into the shadows. I scrambled over, nearly twisting my ankle on a root. When I reached the spot I'd seen him, he wasn't there. I called his name again and again. Ranger sniffed at the ground, whining. "Matt!" my voice echoed, swallowed by silence. Eventually, I gave up, rattled. Why would he be out here if he said he couldn't make it? Or did he make it after all? And if so, why play hide and seek? I felt betrayed, but mostly frightened. With little choice, I wandered the perimeter of that cursed grove, searching for any sign of my tent or maybe a path away. Nothing. Exhaustion tugged at me, and I finally collapsed by a fallen log. My dog pressed his snout into my hand, whimpering. "It's going to be okay, buddy," I said, stroking his fur, though I didn't believe it myself. The day crawled by. My watch was useless. My phone was dead. Time itself felt meaningless. The sun overhead never seemed to shift from midday. Shadows seemed stuck in place. At some point, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around. Matt stood there again, same weird grin. I scrambled up, but he turned and walked into the grove. This time, I followed aggressively, ignoring the creeping dread. I pushed through the dark trunks, feeling the bark snag my clothes. The deeper I went, the gloomier it got. Ranger barked, but I pressed on, determined not to lose Matt again. After a few minutes, the air smelled damp and musty, like rotting leaves and something else rancid. My feet squelched in soft earth. Then I noticed a shape in front of me. A tall figure in tattered clothing. It was Matt, or a twisted version of him. His eyes had a glazed film over them, and he was still smiling. The corners of his mouth stretched inhumanly wide, as though the muscles had been replaced with a puppet's string. I forced out a shaky greeting. "Matt, what's happening?" He stared, head tilting too far to one side. His jaw twitched, as if something beneath his skin was moving. Then, in a voice that sounded raw, watery, he said, "I missed the trip." Those words made no sense. He giggled in a stilted way, and a line of black drool trickled from the corner of his mouth. My stomach lurched. He moved forward, and I instinctively took a step back. Ranger growled. Matt's left arm twitched like a broken marionette, then he lunged at me. He made no sound except a strangled gurgle. I tried to sidestep, but he was freakishly quick. He grabbed my shoulder, nails digging in. My mind roared with fear, adrenaline surged. Ranger launched himself at Matt's legs, causing him to stumble. I used the moment to wrestle free. Falling to the ground, I saw Matt's body spasm. Something was writhing beneath his shirt, slithering lumps moving up his ribs across his chest. He turned his head and hissed. an animalistic noise that wrenched a scream from me. I scrambled backward, eyes wide, refusing to believe what I was seeing. That's when he let out a sickening sound, like wet fabric tearing. His skin along the side of his torso began to peel. Strips of flesh parted, revealing dark, fibrous roots and twisting black moss. My rational mind cracked. I remember babbling curses, begging him to stay back. Instead, he lunged at me again. Ranger bit down on Matt's calf, shaking violently. The thing that looked like Matt toppled. I fumbled for my camping knife, the only weapon I had. My hands trembled so hard I almost dropped it. But something else emerged from behind Matt. A figure towering over him, or perhaps floating. My eyes struggled to interpret it. A woman's shape, hunched and elongated with limbs too thin, her face covered in a patchwork of flesh. I only caught glimpses because as soon as I looked, she was gone. Then I saw her again on my other side, as if she blinked in and out of existence. The sound in the air was a hushed wail, like the moan of a distant wind. My mind repeated the phrase, "This can't be real, this can't be real." But there it was, as real as the pain in my shoulder from Matt's claw-like grip. Matt scrambled to his feet with a herky-jerky movement. Ranger tried to hold him, but Matt's strength was unnatural. I lunged forward with the knife and plunged it into his upper arm. I felt something give, spongy and not quite human. He hissed again, trying to raise his hand to strike me. Blindly, I yanked the knife free, bracing for his next attack, but he just froze. His eyes flickered with something like recognition, and for a single heartbeat I saw the old Matt in there, his eyes wide with terror, mouth shaping a single word. Help. Then the woman's figure drifted closer, her arms lengthening, the stitched flesh on her face forming a harrowing grin of mismatched skin. She touched Matt's shoulder, and I watched in horror as he collapsed, as though his bones turned to liquid. A rancid smell of decay washed over me, and the woman turned her face toward me. I couldn't scream. My voice died in my throat. Some primal survival instinct kicked in. I yelled for Ranger and tore through the woods, ducking branches, ignoring the stinging scrapes on my arms. The black trees seemed to shift around me, or maybe I was just delirious. Twice I tripped over roots and fell face first into the loam, tasting mud and leaves. Time stretched, or maybe it folded in on itself. At one point, I swear I looked back and saw the woman floating after me, not running, just gliding, her limbs trailing behind her, and her head turned at an impossible angle. Eventually, I burst out into a grassy clearing. I stumbled to a halt, panting, and looked around. The clearing was unfamiliar. Where was my gear? Where was the path? I felt an icy wave of frustration, fear, and hopelessness. How could I be so lost in an area that, on any normal map, was just a short stretch from Teeter Rock? Ranger was at my side, hackles raised, muzzle soaked in spittle. I slumped to my knees and tried to calm him. My brain reeled. Matt, if that even was Matt, was lost in that grove or had become something else. Night came swiftly, or at least the sky darkened as if the sun had set. Confusion battered me. It couldn't be that late. I needed shelter. My tent was gone. My supplies were worthless. I rummaged in my pack and found only a half-full water bottle that seemed clean. The rest were still contaminated with that black filth. My stomach growled, but I wasn't sure I could keep anything down anyway. To get some relief from the wind, I found a shallow dip in the earth near a boulder and crawled in with Ranger. Exhaustion overcame me, and I dozed in a haze of terror. I woke to the sound of footsteps crunching on the grass. The sky was pitch black, dotted with stars so bright they seemed to pulse. I held Ranger close, hoping whoever was out there wouldn't see us. My heart hammered. The footsteps paused, then continued away, fading into the distance. I didn't dare investigate. When light returned, it wasn't the soft glow of dawn, but a harsh, overcast brightness. My watch read 12:16 again, still stuck. I decided to move. Sitting still felt like waiting to die. So I walked. I limped, really, because my left ankle was throbbing from the repeated falls the night before. Ranger hobbled at my side, exhausted as well. We must have wandered for hours. My mind was in a constant loop. Find a road, find a sign, find your way back. But every hill looked the same, every meadow the same. Eventually, we reached a vantage point that overlooked an odd shape in the distance, maybe a man-made structure. Relief soared in my chest. I headed that way, ignoring the pain in my ankle. As we approached, I saw that it was a dilapidated wooden shack, maybe an old hunting cabin or storage shed. The door was hanging off a broken hinge. My hopes of a phone or radio soared, though it quickly plummeted once I got closer and smelled the pungent odor of decay wafting from inside. I hesitated, but the possibility of shelter made me push forward. The interior was dim, littered with broken tools and piles of dead leaves. The stench was overwhelming. The floorboards creaked underfoot, threatening to give. I swept my flashlight, I still had that at least, around. In the corner I saw bones. A pile, bleached white, some cracked open. My breath caught. They were not all animal bones. I recognized a human skull among them. My stomach lurched and I gagged, nearly retching in a corner. Ranger whimpered. We both backed away, trembling. Then something on the far wall caught my eye. Runes carved into the wood, swirling symbols that made my head hurt to look at them. The largest carving resembled the shape of a woman with outstretched arms, lines radiating around her like a twisted halo. Near the carvings, a single name had been scratched repeatedly, as if in desperation. Martha, over and over again. I didn't want to think about who might have done this or why. I just wanted to leave. I turned to go, but froze when I saw a figure in the doorway. For a split second, I thought it was the woman again. Instead, it was Matt, or something wearing Matt's face. He was half in shadow, that same too-wide grin frozen on his lips. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused. He stepped inside, closing the distance in an unsteady shuffle. This time, I noticed he was missing a chunk of flesh from his arm, where I'd stabbed him, and it showed only black, ropey fibers beneath. His eyes were dead, filmed over, yet in them was a flicker of agony, like a trapped soul. My throat constricted. He croaked a single word, "Jeremy." Then he advanced. Ranger lunged, but Matt, or that thing, flung him aside with terrifying strength. I heard a yelp, and fury filled me. Mustering every shred of courage, I brandished the knife again. The creature's lips curled, and a voice that was half Matt, half something else hissed, "You don't leave. You grow." The moment he said grow, I heard a whisper behind me. Like a mother hush lullaby, I was certain it was the woman. In the gloom, I sensed her shape, elongated limbs, face hidden behind that stitching. She was only a few feet away, silent. My entire body shook. I wanted to fight, but fear paralyzed me. Before I could react, Matt lunged for my wrist, trying to wrest the knife away. The stench of rotting moss and decay poured off him. He managed to knock me off balance, and I toppled onto a pile of bones. They clattered beneath me. My stomach heaved as a femur rolled under my shoulder. In desperation, I kicked out wildly. My foot connected with Matt's knee and he collapsed momentarily. The woman's whisper reverberated through the shack. Ranger recovered and clamped his jaws on Matt's calf again. But this time, the calf gave way with a sick, tearing sound. Matt shrieked, the voice fracturing between human agony and a guttural rasp. Black fluid sprayed the dusty boards. Terror fueled me. I scrambled up, ignoring the jolt of pain in my ankle, and lurched for the door. As I did, the woman extended a hand, her nails fused into spindly, bony tips. She snagged the back of my shirt. I felt fabric tear as I threw all my weight forward. By some miracle, I tore free, the ripping sound echoing in the silent shack. Outside, I heard the woman's voice in my head, words that weren't in English. Yet I somehow understood, "Come back, harvest." They slithered in my thoughts. I almost lost my balance, but Ranger barked behind me, snapping me out of the trance. He was out the door too, panting, fur stained with that black ooze. We ran until I could no longer breathe, my injured ankle screaming with every step, and then collapsed behind a small rise. My mind was unraveling. This was impossible. No sense of time, no sense of direction. A friend turned into a monster with plants or fungus in his flesh. A woman who floated, whose face was stitched. I had no idea if she was real, a ghost, a demon, or if I was going insane. The physical evidence was too strong for it to be mere hallucination. The pain in my shoulder and ankle, the smell, the tang of fear in the air, these were real. In desperation, I checked the horizon. If I could find Teeter Rock from a distance, I could head that way, find my SUV. I half expected to see the black grove or the shack behind me, always looming. Instead, after what felt like hours of wandering, I spotted a faint shape that might have been a tall stone. My pulse quickened. With no better plan, I hobbled in that direction, praying it was Teeter Rock. We must have walked for hours, but the stone never seemed closer. I kept encouraging Ranger, who was limping worse than I was. My lungs burned. The sun overhead cast pale light that never shifted. Everything felt stuck in a twisted bubble of time. At some point, we found ourselves in that ring of black trees again. My fury and despair surged. How could we be back here? I remember screaming, cursing the sky, cursing whatever monstrous presence was toying with us. Near the center of the grove, the ground was charred, as if a fire had swept through. My eyes flicked around and spotted something metallic, a piece of my tent pole, partially melted, but definitely from my kit. Then I saw what might have been the remains of my tent, just scraps of synthetic fabric. My heart raced with confusion and fear. How did it end up destroyed? That was when I noticed a half-buried canister of fuel for my camp stove. In a surge of inspiration or madness, I thought, fire might be the only way to fight whatever was in these woods. If I couldn't escape, maybe I could burn it all down. I scooped up the canister, rummaged for anything flammable. The ring of black trees was thick with dry bark, twisted roots. Fire might spread quickly here, though the bark itself looked bizarrely damp. Still, it was my only plan. I built a crude pile of twigs, leaves, and bits of cloth, doused it with the leftover fuel in the canister. Using a lighter from my pocket, I sparked it. The flame leapt up, crackling in a swirl of greenish smoke. Fueled by desperation, I dragged more branches into the growing blaze, ignoring the searing heat and smoke stinging my eyes. Soon, a pillar of fire roared, tongues of flame licking the nearest tree trunk. The bark hissed, sizzling with that strange dampness, but eventually it caught and the fire climbed hungrily. An unearthly wail reverberated in the grove. I turned in time to see the woman, Martha, if the carvings in that shack were any indication, standing about 20 yards away. Her mouth, or the stitches where her mouth should be, parted slightly. The stitching tore. An ear-splitting shriek rang out, a sound that physically rattled my teeth. The trees around me seemed to tremble in response, their bark pulsing. My heart hammered, but I was beyond fear now. I was feral with the instinct to destroy whatever this was. Ranger growled, then whimpered, tail between his legs. With a final twist of the canister, I sent a spray of fuel toward her. The droplets ignited midair. She vanished in a swirl of black smoke, reappearing seconds later at my left as though she could teleport. The shriek died away, replaced by a whispered hiss. "You do not burn me." Even though her lips didn't move right, I heard the words in my head. The trees were blazing behind me, and I realized with horror that I might have trapped myself in a ring of fire. But just then, a flaming branch cracked and fell from above, landing near her feet. Flames licked at her robe-like garment. She recoiled, letting out another shrill cry that vibrated inside my skull. The air around me buzzed, and I sensed an unseen force straining. I lunged forward with the broken tent pole in my other hand. In a wild, final act of terror and adrenaline, I thrust the jagged metal end into her midsection. She staggered back, limbs flailing. A guttural scream ripping from her throat. Her body seemed to flicker, as if caught between physical and ethereal forms. The stitching on her face split further, revealing glimpses of hollow darkness beneath. No flesh, no bone, just swirling black emptiness. The ground quaked violently. I lost my balance, tumbling into a patch of flaming grass. Pain ripped across my side, but I rolled away to douse the embers on my shirt. The next thing I knew, Ranger was dragging me by the sleeve, pulling me away from the inferno. I glimpsed Martha, pinned by the flaming tree trunk. She writhed, and her arms elongated, trying to reach me. The black ooze seeped from tears in her body, then ignited with a harsh pop. I scrambled to my feet, letting Ranger guide me out of the grove, weaving through the smoke and flames. As we cleared the last ring of black trees, I remember everything going dark, as if the sky itself had been consumed. My lungs were raw from smoke inhalation, and the edges of my vision swirled. I stumbled, delirious, and collapsed. The last thing I saw was the silhouette of that burning grove behind me, and what might have been the figure of a tall woman thrashing in the flames. I must have blacked out for a long time. I regained consciousness in what looked like a standard hospital room. Fluorescent lights glared overhead. My first coherent thought was, "It's over." Was it all a nightmare? A nurse soon appeared, checking my vitals and offering me a plastic cup of water. She told me I'd been found about 20 miles from Teeter Rock, dehydrated and delirious. Search and rescue had spotted the smoke from miles away and discovered me alone in the tall grass. Alone. That single word shattered any relief. "Where's Ranger? My dog?" I croaked. The nurse frowned. She said they didn't find a dog. My insides turned cold. I insisted he must still be out there, but the nurse just quietly set me up with an IV drip. A sheriff's deputy showed up later with questions. Did I start a wildfire? They found a patch of burnt land in the Flint Hills. I told them my story, or an abridged version. They gave me a pitying look, assuming I was hallucinating. "We'll keep an eye out for your dog," was all they said. I didn't have the energy to argue. When they mentioned my friend Matt, I said yes. I'd gone out there with the hope he would join me, but they found no trace of him or his vehicle. He hadn't used his credit cards or bank account in days. His family told the authorities they hadn't heard from him either. Officially, he was just missing. I spent the next week in that hospital physically recovering. My body had second-degree burns on my side, scrapes, bruises, and I was severely dehydrated. My mental state was no better. Sleep was nearly impossible without sedation. Each time I drifted off, I'd see that horrifying woman's face or the black sludge in Matt's wounds. Eventually, the hospital discharged me with instructions to rest and see a therapist for possible PTSD. I left, but I felt no closure. Back at home, I found a sense of disconnect from reality. My phone was replaced, but sometimes, even with a full charge, the battery icon would flicker, reminiscent of how it died in the woods. The clocks in my apartment seemed off. Occasionally, I'd glance at the microwave clock and it'd read 12:16, the same time from my watch. A fleeting glitch, or maybe my traumatized mind playing tricks. Then came the nights when I heard faint barking in the walls. At first, I dismissed it as the neighbor's dog, but I soon realized my neighbor didn't own a dog. Even so, I'd wake up to the scratch, scratch, scratch of claws behind the drywall, a whining that sounded achingly like Ranger. I tried to follow the sound, pressing my ear to the plaster, but it would stop abruptly, leaving me with tears of confusion and heartbreak. Months have passed since then, and I still haven't found a trace of Ranger. I've reached out to every shelter, posted flyers, offered a reward. No sightings. Matt remains missing, too. Part of me wonders if the real Matt ever showed up in the first place. Another part of me wonders if he was lost to that thing, that forest that devoured time and reason. Sometimes, I'll wake up in the middle of the night convinced I smell that rancid sulfur odor. I'll flick on the light, half expecting to see black ooze seeping from my walls or that figure in the corner of my bedroom. It's never there, yet the smell lingers just long enough to jolt my memories. If I doze off again, I see the black grove in flames, hear the splitting shriek of the woman, and I feel a presence behind me, whispering with my own voice. I've gone over every detail with my therapist, but I can tell she thinks some pieces are delusions, that maybe I was under extreme stress, had a breakdown, or encountered something hallucinogenic in the wilderness. I almost wish that were true, but deep inside I know what I saw. I guess that's everything. The authorities concluded that I accidentally started a grass fire and got lost, that Matt disappeared willingly or had an accident. An open case, no closure. As for Ranger, they chalked it up to a missing pet in a big rural area. But I'll never forget how real it all was. The woman, Martha, the twisted illusions, the stasis of time, the black moss inside Matt's body. Every so often, I'll dream of her face, stitched and vacant, leaning in close to mine, and I'll wake up screaming. If you ever find yourself near Teeter Rock in the Flint Hills, do yourself a favor. Stick to the main trail. Don't look for any hidden paths. If you hear your name called by your own voice, run. Because once you've entered the Black Grove, time doesn't belong to you anymore, and neither does your mind. I don't know if telling this story will help me find peace. Maybe it's some form of therapy. I wish I could say I survived with minimal scars. But the nightmares, the missing dog, the creeping sense that reality is fragile at best, those remain. Each time I glance at a mirror, I see a reflection that's slightly off, like my face is reversed, or the clock on the wall behind me points to 12:16. That's when I realize the Black Grove isn't done with me yet. Perhaps it never will be. And the final blow is that I'm not even sure I want to escape it entirely. Because what if leaving it behind means forgetting Ranger? Forgetting Matt? They're part of that place now, and maybe part of me is too. So that's my story. Call it a warning or the ramblings of a broken mind. I can only tell you what I experienced, and I can't promise it's over. For me, it's carved into my memories. An ever-present reminder that there are places in this world that obey no law of nature or reason. Places that devour your sense of time, your sense of self, and leave you haunted by a single unanswerable question. Did you escape, or did you simply wander into a larger cage? My name is Jack Morris. I'm 28 years old. This happened in late October 2023 in the Cimarron National Grassland of southwestern Kansas, near some of the old routes of the Santa Fe Trail. It has taken me a long time to even talk about it, and I'm not sure I'll ever fully recover. But I need to get the story out somehow, if only to remember that it was real. I'm not a military veteran, nor do I have any formal survival training. My only experiences in the outdoors were casual hikes and a couple of summer camping trips when I was a kid, so I went into this trip with a nervous excitement, hoping to find some peace and isolation. Instead, I found an entirely different kind of isolation, one that nearly devoured me. I agreed to go on this trip with an old college friend named Chris Tanner. He was 29, a charismatic, warm-hearted guy who always seemed to have energy to spare. We hadn't spent much time together since graduation, but after I quit my job in IT, during a meltdown in the open office, no less, he reached out. He suggested we spend a week hiking and camping out in Cimarron National Grassland. He'd been reading about scenic byways, the remnants of the Santa Fe Trail, the wide-open skies that let you clear your head. Honestly, the idea felt like just the thing I needed to gather my thoughts and plan my next move in life. I took my German Shepherd mix, Boomer, along with me. He was my lifeline, my emotional anchor. I'd had a panic attack at work a few months before, and Boomer's presence did wonders for my anxiety. Chris and I planned to be out there for about a week. We each had enough supplies for 10 days in case of any emergency. Nothing about the plan seemed unusual or inherently dangerous. We'd hike the most remote parts of the grassland, set up a couple of base camps, and come out with new stories to tell. We drove out in my old SUV. The land spread out on either side, golden and brown grass bending in the endless wind. We joked about how empty southwestern Kansas looked, how the horizon felt as if it stretched forever. Every so often, we'd pass a battered sign that indicated we were nearing the Santa Fe Trail historical markers. It was like driving backward in time, watching modern roads dissolve into dusty paths with decades-old bullet holes in the signage. By the time we reached our chosen starting point, it was late afternoon. Chris hopped out, grinning like he always did, rummaging for the weed he had brought. I insisted we first set up a basic camp before he disappeared into a cloud of smoke. He laughed and told me to lighten up and that everything would be fine. Boomer hopped out with more enthusiasm than me, wagging his tail and sniffing around. He was a big dog, but gentle enough that Chris liked having him around, especially to scare off any coyotes or whatever else lurked in the grass at night. It felt peaceful the first evening. The wind was a soft hush, the sky a swirl of oranges and purples as the sun disappeared behind the horizon. We quickly discovered there was no signal on our phones. Not just low bars, no bars. Chris shrugged, unconcerned, but I frowned at my GPS. It was stuck on some loading screen, refusing to show our location. We had paper maps, though, so it didn't feel like a big deal. I told myself it might even be nice to be forced off the grid. After all, that was why we came here, to escape. That first night, everything felt normal, if a bit too still. We built a small fire, ate some of our supplies, MRE packs Chris had gotten from a friend, and talked about life. For the first time in forever, I felt I could be honest with Chris about my panic attacks, the nagging feeling of emptiness since leaving my job. He listened, patted my shoulder, said we'd figure things out. We both turned in, feeling oddly hopeful. The next morning, I woke early. I could see a faint shimmer of sunlight through the tent's fabric. My eyelids felt heavy, as if I'd slept too long, yet the morning sky still looked pale. Confused, I checked my phone. The screen was black. Dead battery, apparently, though I knew I'd turned it off the previous evening with half a charge left. Chris's phone had died too, he said. We shrugged it off, attributing it to the cold. Sometimes batteries lose charge in lower temperatures, right? We decided to do a short day hike to get our bearings. Boomer seemed eager, so we followed a faint path that was supposed to lead us closer to some scenic rock formations. I brought my compass, which I'd used in other hikes, but the needle spun erratically as if fighting an invisible magnet. Chris laughed it off, joking we were in the Bermuda Triangle of Kansas. I tried to stifle the anxiety clawing at my chest. The sky was wide open, no hint of storms, yet I remember feeling a strange electric tension in the air. Boomer kept sniffing, hackles raising, but then he'd settle down as if he'd just heard a twig snap. We came across a few scattered deer bones that looked bleached by the sun. Perfectly normal in ranching country, but the arrangement looked almost ceremonial. Ribs stacked in a circle, the skull dead center. I tried to chalk it up to scavengers. Throughout the hike, Chris tried to keep up the banter, but each time I looked at him, he seemed more on edge than he cared to admit. He checked the map frequently, frowning. The rock formation we aimed for never appeared. By mid-afternoon, we turned around, frustrated. Strangely, it took us hours to make it back to camp, even though we hadn't gone that far. We didn't say it out loud, but it felt like time slipped sideways. Back at camp, we tried to start the fire again. The kindling was dry, yet the flames struggled. When they did finally catch, they crackled oddly, blue and green sparks dancing at the edges. Chris blamed chemicals in the old grass or maybe some copper from the rusted bullet casings we saw. The explanation was plausible enough, but it didn't stop the hair on my arms from standing on end. We ate in silence until sunset. That's when Boomer started growling at nothing, or so it seemed. He stared into the distance, eyes locked on a line of scraggly cottonwoods. Every so often I thought I heard a rustling from that direction, but a quick shine of the flashlight turned up nothing. Once darkness came in full, my anxiety churned in my gut, no matter how I tried to calm myself. I barely slept that night. Over and over, I heard Boomer give a low growl or a short bark. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to find my sleeping bag unzipped. The tent flap was still closed, but the bag itself was open from the inside. I checked my watch. It said 2:13 a.m. When I flicked on my lantern, Chris mumbled something in his tent, but we didn't really talk. In the morning, I discovered Chris's sleeping bag the same way, unzipped while he slept. He chuckled nervously, guessing we'd done it ourselves in our sleep. But there were little details that didn't match up, like the zipper snag that usually took 2 hands to undo. Boomer paced outside, uninterested in breakfast. It put me on edge to see my dog so restless. Before we set off on another attempt at exploring, we double-checked our supplies. Our water jugs looked half empty, though we were sure we'd used only a portion. Some of our MREs were moldy. That made no sense. They were sealed and supposedly stable for years. Chris cursed. Tossing the rotted ones aside, the whole campsite smelled faintly of decay. That afternoon, Chris suggested he head out alone to gather more firewood before dusk. Usually, I would have just gone with him, but there was an uneasy tension in the air we both felt. Maybe we needed some space. He joked he was perfectly capable of picking up sticks. I told him to hurry back. He left around 2 p.m., and I sat by the half-dead fire for what felt like an eternity. Boomer laid his head on my lap, whining occasionally. Hours passed, the sun sliding down toward the horizon, pink and orange light cutting across the grassland. No Chris. I started to worry. By the time it was almost dark, I grabbed my flashlight and jacket, intending to track him down. Then Boomer pricked his ears, stood up, and let out a short bark. I saw Chris's figure on the ridgeline, maybe 50 yards away. He was carrying an armful of twigs and branches. At first, I felt relief, until he got closer, stepping into the glow of the dying sunlight. Boomer growled. I'd never heard Boomer growl at Chris before. Chris just smiled. It was an odd, tight-lipped smile. His eyes seemed distant, and he didn't blink as much as he should. His voice sounded calm, too calm, as if nothing were amiss. "Dude, where have you been?" I asked, feeling a sudden spike of adrenaline. He blinked once, slowly, and said, "I've been around, found some good wood." Then he giggled, a hollow sound that made the hair on my neck rise. I noticed that he was humming a strange tune under his breath. No real melody. "Why'd it take you so long?" I pressed, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged. "Guess I got turned around. You know how it is out here." He set the wood down but kept staring at me. I realized he wasn't looking at me. It was more like he was staring at my nose, or maybe just past my head. Boomer circled around behind me, ears back, tail stiff, as if waiting for a command to attack. I tried to shake it off, but the tension only got worse. When I asked Chris what direction he'd gone, he gave a vague gesture that didn't match the compass or the topography. Then he said, "Remember that dog you had back in college, Buster? He used to chase squirrels at the dorm." I stared. "I never had a dog in college, Chris. You know that. Boomer is the only dog I've ever owned." He shrugged again, unconcerned, and went on humming. That night, everything got worse. Our small fire spat out green and blue sparks again, as if the wood Chris gathered was tainted with chemicals. He just sat there, smiling. I prodded him, asking if he was feeling all right, but he only responded with short, clipped sentences. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "I can't wait to see the sunrise, Buster." I glanced at Boomer, confused. The dog stared back as if he understood the confusion but had no way to share it. Eventually, Chris mumbled something about being tired and went to his tent. I stayed awake longer, listening. Boomer refused to enter the tent, so we dozed by the fire. Maybe an hour later, I startled awake. The fire was just embers, casting faint red light. I heard it then, soft weeping, somewhere on the other side of the campsite. It sounded like my own voice. I froze. It was as if someone had recorded me crying and was playing it back. The hairs on my arms pricked, and I broke into a cold sweat. Boomer rose, growling low. Fumbling for my flashlight, I stepped toward the sound. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air had thickened. The crying abruptly stopped. When I flashed the light around, I saw nothing but a dim shape moving between the cottonwoods. I started to follow, but then I heard Chris's tent unzip behind me. He was standing there, peering out from the shadows. I caught only a glimpse of his face in the flashlight's beam, vacant, as though he was half asleep but with eyes wide open. Then he retreated back inside and zipped the tent shut. I stood there, shaking, until the wind carried the last of the sobbing away. The only thing left was silence and Boomer's low whimper. I didn't sleep at all the rest of that night. The next morning, I looked at my watch. It was ticking backward. Not in seconds, but in random jumps. 5:12, then 3:59, then 7:43, all AM, all nonsense. The confusion sank into my gut. I couldn't trust the watch anymore. My phone was still dead. Chris emerged from his tent eventually, a serene smile on his face. He claimed to have slept great. I asked if he'd heard any crying. He just stared. When we checked our supplies, half the water was gone. Some MRE packets we hadn't even opened were now swarming with maggots. Chris shrugged. "That can happen," he said. "Temperature changes can cause the seals to break, maybe." His casual tone, the total lack of concern, made my stomach twist. It was like he didn't even care if we had enough supplies to make it through the next few days. Boomer began pacing the campsite, sniffing at every tent corner. Then, unexpectedly, he took off at a sprint toward a clump of brush. I ran after him, but he was too fast. I had no idea what he was after. Maybe a rabbit. Chris just watched, not moving, that odd smile flickering on his face. I shouted for Chris to help me catch Boomer. He didn't budge. I wanted to yell, but fear slithered inside me, warning me not to antagonize him. Instead, I tore off into the brush alone. I followed the sound of Boomer's barks, which turned into yelps and then went silent. My heart pounded as I stumbled over uneven ground. A little way in, I found Boomer. He was limping, his muzzle caked in blood, as if he'd bitten something. One ear was torn, bleeding. When he saw me, he let out a pathetic whine and staggered closer. I knelt, checking him over. His paw was bent at an awkward angle, and large claw marks raked across his flank. I heard a strange rumble, like a growl, but deeper, from somewhere in the undergrowth. Fear jabbed at me. I scooped Boomer into my arms and forced myself back toward the campsite as fast as I could, half expecting something to leap out at me. I caught glimpses of movement among the scrub, a shape that seemed too tall, gliding behind the thin mesquite. Once, I thought I saw a reflection of my own face peering out from behind the branches, eyes wide. I nearly collapsed when I made it back. Chris was waiting, arms folded, eyebrows slightly raised. He glanced at Boomer's wounds but said nothing at first. Something attacked him, I managed, out of breath. There might be a mountain lion or something out there. Chris shrugged. We'll be careful. That was it. No alarm, no concern that Boomer might die from blood loss. As I wrapped Boomer's wounds the best I could, Chris just watched. I had to fight the urge to scream at him. Then I saw his shoes. They were caked in dark, wet dirt, too fresh, too thick, as if he'd been wading through mud. But we hadn't come across any boggy areas. The grassland was bone dry. My mind flashed to the possibility that Chris had been out there with Boomer, or whatever had attacked him. A chill curled in my stomach. That night, Boomer woke me with frantic barking. I rushed out of my tent, clutching a flashlight. Chris's tent flap was open, but no sign of him. I scanned the darkness. For a moment, I thought I spotted two figures standing near the edge of the firelight, their outlines flickering. Both looked like Chris. Identical silhouettes, the same posture. Boomer lunged, ignoring his injured paw. One silhouette peeled away, vanishing into the darkness. The other stepped forward, into the dying glow of the fire. It was Chris, all right, or something wearing his face. He held a hunting knife in one hand, his expression stone cold. My breath hitched. "Chris?" I managed to say. He didn't speak. Instead, he lunged forward with the knife in a wild, sloppy arc. I stumbled back, my flashlight spinning off into the dark. Boomer snarled, launching himself at Chris's legs. Chris pivoted, surprisingly fast, and kicked Boomer in the side. I heard the dog yelp and collapse with a ragged whine. Fury and panic exploded inside me. I tackled Chris, ignoring the risk of the blade. Up close, I could see his face was twisted, the tendons in his neck standing out, eyes wide and bloodshot. His grin never wavered, but it looked more like the rictus grin of a corpse. We both fell into the dirt, and I managed to knock the knife away. He hissed, actually hissed, and threw me aside with unnatural strength. My head smacked the ground, sending stars across my vision. I crawled for the knife, but I couldn't see where it landed. By the time I scrambled to my feet, Chris, or whatever it was, had bolted. I heard a slithering sound in the darkness, like an animal retreating. Boomer lay on his side, panting. His flank was bleeding again. I scooped him up gently. My hands trembled so badly I could hardly hold him. For the rest of the night I kept Boomer close, pressing bandages to his wounds. I tried to keep one eye on the surroundings, but my mind felt hollow with shock. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. I half expected that grin to appear in my dreams, slicing me open in my sleep. Morning came with a creeping sense of dread. I forced myself to search for Chris. I couldn't just leave him to die, not if there was a chance he was still human. With Boomer limping behind me, I followed a set of footprints in the dust. They led me to a small ravine, a tumble of rocks and scrub. The footprints ended abruptly. I scanned the ravine, noticing a dark shape nestled among the rocks. I approached, telling Boomer to wait. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like a pile of raw meat or fresh roadkill. Then, my brain pieced it together. A face contorted in terror. A body, or what was left of one. The torso was hollowed, ribs exposed. Strips of flesh dangled like ribbons. The arms were pinned at awkward angles, as if the victim had been strung up. My stomach lurched. I recognized the face. Even with the horror of the wounds, I knew it was Chris. My friend, the real Chris. My knees buckled and I gagged in the dirt. A swarm of flies buzzed around his remains, crawling across his open mouth. I tasted bile. My eyes burned with tears. I wanted to scream or sob, but nothing came out. Chris had been dead for a while, it seemed. Maybe since he went to gather firewood. That meant the thing I'd been speaking to, the thing I'd tackled in camp, wasn't Chris at all. It was something else, wearing him like a costume. Trembling, I stumbled back to Boomer. He whined and nudged me as if to ask what was wrong. I couldn't even put it into words. Instead, I half walked, half ran away from the ravine. Everything blurred, as if time was unraveling. The compass in my pocket was hot to the touch when I tried to check it. The needle still spun madly. I decided in that moment that we had to leave. Supplies or not, we had to get the hell away from this place. I wanted to get back to the SUV, find the main road, find help, do something that made sense. Adrenaline coursed through me, and I forced Boomer to keep pace despite his limp. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground were pulling us in. The afternoon dragged into evening, and every time I thought we were making progress, the landmarks repeated. We kept passing the same bleached deer bones, the same patch of stunted cottonwoods. Boomer would sniff the air, whine, and we'd see the same trunk with the same weird scorch marks. My watch had long since stopped displaying coherent numbers. I was sure we'd been walking for 8 hours, yet the sun still hovered near the horizon, stuck in a perpetual late afternoon glow. At some point, I blacked out. I came to, lying in a depression in the ground, the sky darker than it should have been. Boomer lay beside me, whimpering softly. My mouth felt like sandpaper, and my head throbbed. I don't know how long I'd been unconscious. When I pulled myself upright, I realized I was missing my backpack. The few supplies we had left were gone. Panic rushed in. I couldn't even remember dropping it. I surveyed the area, but it was nowhere in sight. My mind spun with half-baked theories. Could the creature have taken it? Did I discard it during a hallucination? The dryness in my throat made it impossible to think clearly. Boomer licked my cheek as if to comfort me, but he was trembling too. Night fell quickly. With no tent, no sleeping bags, we were exposed to the cold. Desperate, I tried to gather brush to make a small shelter. The wind picked up, biting at my skin. My watch beeped once, some internal glitch. I looked at it again. It displayed a random date, December 2nd, 1864, 5:44 p.m. My heart hammered. I knew that was impossible, but it rattled me to see the Santa Fe Trail era year appear as though we'd been flung back a century and a half. I piled dead branches, huddling with Boomer for warmth. Exhaustion pulled at me again, so I forced myself to stay awake, replaying the memory of Chris's body in the ravine. Each time I drifted, I jolted awake, certain I heard that same sobbing echoing across the grass. Sometime, close to midnight, or whatever time it truly was, Boomer's ears perked. He stood, growling, into the dark. My heart slammed as I spotted a familiar silhouette approaching. It looked like Boomer. A second Boomer, the same shape, the same gait. My dog's hackles rose. The second boomer growled back, lips curled in a silent snarl. In the faint moonlight, I caught a glimpse of the second dog's eyes. Reflective, but not with the usual greenish flash. Instead, they were a sickly yellow. Then the second boomer launched itself forward. My real dog lunged to meet it. The fight was vicious, a flurry of snapping jaws and fur flying. I grabbed a stick and swung wildly, trying to protect my dog. I felt a jolt as the imposter dog's body collided with me, nearly knocking me over. I hit at it again, connecting with something solid. The creature yelped, but the sound was twisted, as if multiple voices moaned in unison. Finally, the imposter tore away, darting off into the darkness. My real boomer staggered, trembling. His face was lacerated, blood oozing down his snout. I fell to my knees, pressing my hands against the wounds, tears running down my cheeks. No, I kept muttering. Please no. I'd lost Chris. I couldn't lose Boomer too. He gazed at me with eyes dark with pain, then collapsed in the dirt. I felt for a pulse or some sign of movement. His chest rose and fell shallowly. I petted him, whispering, "Hang on, buddy, hang on." But somewhere in my gut, I knew he was mortally wounded. For what felt like hours, I sat there in the cold, stroking Boomer's fur, listening to his breathing grow ragged. Eventually, he made a final rattling exhale, and I felt his body go limp under my hands. A surge of agony tore through me, a wail I could barely keep inside. He was the only family I had left out here, the only anchor to sanity, and now he was gone. I don't know how long I sat there, holding his body. My tears dried in the cold wind. A faint rustling beyond the circle of brush made me look up. Shadows shifted, as if something big was moving out there. I grabbed the same stick, a pathetic weapon, and rose shakily. I half expected the second boomer to return for me, but the movement receded, leaving me alone with my dog's body. By morning, if it was really morning, I was stumbling with delirium. Time had no meaning. My watch beeped nonsense. The sky's light never quite matched the hour I felt inside my bones. I was starving, parched, but my chest was hollow with grief. I wanted to bury Boomer, but the ground was too hard, rocky, and I lacked tools. Something told me I had to keep moving, or I'd die of thirst or freeze during another weird night. My numb mind clung to the thought. There might be a ranger station somewhere. I recalled reading that Cimarron National Grassland had a small outpost at the edge, though it was likely unmanned most of the time. But maybe there would be water, a phone, something to save my life. I must have walked for miles, ignoring the burning thirst. Occasionally, I heard a rustle behind me, or caught a glimpse of a shape in my peripheral vision. Each time I turned, brandishing my worthless stick, but there was nothing. The day was blistering hot now, despite it being late October. My sweat dried on my skin the moment it formed. By early afternoon, assuming it was afternoon, I crested a small ridge. My eyes locked onto a small building in the distance, a squat structure that looked like a dusty ranch shack. Hope flickered. I forced my aching legs to move faster, sliding down the rocky slope. The shape grew larger, revealing a metal roof and a weathered sign out front. Panting, I stumbled to the door. It was indeed a ranger outpost, but from the look of it, nobody had been there in weeks, maybe months. A dusty four-wheeler was parked under a makeshift awning. I yanked the door open and found a small, dim interior with a desk, some filing cabinets, a radio, and a half-stocked first aid kit. My heart soared momentarily at the sight of a water cooler. I rushed over, fumbling for the spigot. Nothing came out but a hiss of air. The water was gone. I almost sobbed. Then I found a row of metal canteens stacked on a shelf. I grabbed the first one, sloshing it. Liquid. I twisted the cap, smelled it. Clean water. Without caution, I gulped down half of it, nearly choking. Relief and panic mingled in my chest. I carried the canteen to the radio, hoping it worked. When I turned the knob, there was only static. I tried channel after channel, static everywhere. In frustration, I shouted into the mic, "Hello, anyone? I'm stranded out here. Please help me." No reply. I hammered the desk in rage. Outside, the wind picked up, clattering a loose piece of tin on the roof. It felt like the place was about to be torn apart by a storm. That's when I heard footsteps, heavy boots on the porch outside. My pulse thundered. I fumbled for something to defend myself. The only thing within reach was a rusty machete leaning in a corner. I gripped it, heart hammering. The doorknob jiggled. Then the door creaked open. 3 men stepped in, wearing dusty ranger uniforms. Their eyes were hooded, and their smiles were too wide, reminding me of Chris's grin. They stood there, watching me. One of them said, "Hello, friend. You're looking rough." I couldn't speak. My throat locked up. Another one stepped forward, rummaging in the first aid kit. "Need water?" he asked in a strange, cheerful tone. I nodded numbly. He handed me a canteen identical to the one I'd already opened. I forced myself to take a small sip. My instincts screamed danger, but my thirst demanded more water. One of them, the tallest, fiddled with the radio, turning knobs. "Static," he said. "Radio must be broken." Then he slowly turned to look at me, a grin spreading across his face. A grin I'd seen before. I realized with a sick jolt he was humming that same tuneless melody Chris had hummed. My stomach dropped. I raised the machete. "Stay back," I croaked, stepping away. They stared at me, unblinking. The tallest man's grin faltered. He sniffed the air. "Why fight it?" he asked, in a voice that warbled as if multiple people spoke at once. The other 2 advanced slightly, their movements unnaturally synchronized. Suddenly, the outpost door slammed open, letting in a gust of wind. I seized the chance, sprinting for the door before they could block me. One of them lunged, but I swung the machete wildly, connecting with something soft. A spurt of dark fluid splashed across my face, rank and foul. The thing recoiled with a gargled hiss, and I barreled outside. I didn't look back. I heard them shouting or screaming, but the words were garbled. The wind howled, swirling dust in the air, stinging my eyes. I spotted the old four-wheeler. A small part of me realized it probably wouldn't run, but I had to try. I hopped on, turned the key. Miraculously, it coughed to life. The gas gauge read nearly empty, but I didn't care. As I sped away, I glanced back to see the 3 men standing on the porch, their forms blurring, as if the dust storm itself was part of them. One held his arm, black ichor dripping. Another stood still, that grin plastered on his face. I saw him open his mouth wide, wider than humanly possible, as though dislocating his jaw. Then the rising dust swallowed them from view. I don't know how long I drove. The four-wheeler sputtered and eventually died. I'd covered enough distance to see faint tire tracks on a more established road. My entire body was shaking from both thirst and terror. Staggering on foot, I followed the tracks until, at last, I saw a parked truck with official markings. It was an actual Forest Service truck, the occupant rummaging in the back. Relief, panic, dread, everything slammed into me at once. I approached cautiously. The occupant, a grizzled man with a gray beard, turned and gave me a startled look. He blinked normally. He didn't grin like a madman. A wave of relief nearly took me to my knees. He ran over, calling out, "Holy hell, son! You look like you've been dragged through half the state." I collapsed, babbling about a monster, about how something killed my friend. The ranger, his name tag read H. Wilcox, helped me into his truck. He gave me water, asked about injuries, Said he'd get me to the nearest hospital in Elkhart or maybe somewhere with a medical clinic. I just nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. Boomer was gone. Chris was gone. I could scarcely form words. We drove on a dirt road that gradually smoothed into an actual paved highway. Wilcox talked into a radio, calling for backup, requesting medical assistance. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could warn people. Maybe I could get help for Chris's remains. At the same time, a deep dread gnawed at me. I kept remembering that grin, those footsteps, and the humming. We reached a small clinic near Elkhart just after the sky turned an odd orange. Sunset, presumably, though my sense of time was shattered. A nurse greeted us, leading me into a curtained exam area, hooking me up to an IV. I tried to recount what happened, the shape-shifting, the rotting supplies, the weird time anomalies. They gave me sympathetic nods, probably suspecting I had hallucinated half of it. I asked about Chris's body, begged them to send a search party. The nurse promised they'd alert the authorities. Over the next hour, a local sheriff's deputy arrived, taking my statement. I pleaded with him to send help, to watch out for people who wore faces that weren't theirs. He scribbled notes, gave Wilcox a sidelong look that said maybe they thought I was delirious. They wanted me to stay overnight for observation. I was in no state to argue. Exhaustion crushed me. A doctor came to do a quick evaluation. He said I was dehydrated, had mild hypothermia, and was in shock. They gave me sedatives. Sometime later, I drifted in and out of a fitful sleep. The IV beeped softly in the background. My dreams were a swirl of half-remembered images. Chris's ravaged body, Boomer's final breath, the rotted food, the ephemeral sense of lost time. In my dream, I found myself back in the grassland, the infinite sky swirling overhead in unnatural colors. The Chris creature smiled at me, then peeled back its skin to reveal 100 different faces churning beneath. I woke to darkness and quiet. The clock on the wall read 3 a.m. A figure stood by my bed, scribbling notes on a clipboard. I recognized Wilcox's voice as he whispered to someone else in the room. Then a soft humming trickled into my awareness. My heart lurched, the same tuneless melody. Slowly, I turned my head. Wilcox was there, but he wore the same grin I'd seen on Chris. A nurse stood next to him, humming that eerie tune. My chest clenched. I realized they were watching me intently, both smiling. "How are you feeling?" Wilcox asked, his tone too calm. "Need anything?" I shook my head, terror seizing my voice. He stepped closer, and in the pale hallway light I saw that his eyes weren't blinking. The nurse angled her head, smiling wide. My breath caught in my throat. I tore the IV out of my arm with a spasm of panic. Jumping from the bed, I nearly collapsed. My legs were weak, my entire body trembling. They made no move to restrain me, just watched with their uncanny smiles. When I tried the door, it was locked. I pounded on it, shouting for help. No response. Turning, I saw Wilcox tilt his head in that same inhuman way. "Easy, son," he said, but his voice warbled with that multitonal echo. "You're safe here. Let's talk." The nurse took a step forward. I scrambled back, scanning the room for a weapon. There was nothing but medical supplies. In desperation, I grabbed a metal IV pole and held it like a spear. They both laughed softly, the sound hollow and wrong. "We'll get you back out there soon," Wilcox said. "You left a piece of yourself in the grass." I felt tears burning my eyes. My mind spun with terror, confusion, and utter despair. Was I still hallucinating? Or had this nightmare followed me into the real world? Pounding on the other side of the door made me freeze. Then the door burst open. Another nurse, the one who admitted me earlier, rushed in, followed by an actual deputy in uniform. They saw me brandishing the IV pole, eyes wild. The nurse turned on the lights fully. Wilcox and the other nurse were gone. The deputy frowned, asked me what was going on. I could only stammer that Wilcox had been in here, that something was wrong. The deputy said Wilcox had gone home hours ago. They eventually calmed me down, gave me something to help me sleep again. But I refused, terrified of drifting back into that nightmare. My blood still pounded with adrenaline. They discharged me the following afternoon, after psych evaluations and fluid treatments. The local sheriff spoke with me again, gently explaining that a search party was going out to look for Chris's remains, but I shouldn't get my hopes up. The nurse who'd been on duty insisted no one had entered my room at 3 a.m. The door had been locked to let me rest. Real or not, that final encounter shredded the last shreds of my composure. The next day, I demanded a bus ticket home. I couldn't stop shaking, my mind haunted by images of those smiles. The staff let me go with a solemn warning to follow up for trauma counseling. Before I left, the deputy returned, looking grim. He told me they did locate a heavily decomposed body in a ravine matching Chris's description. They also found a mutilated dog near the site, though it was half buried and picked at by vultures. A wave of numbness washed over me. I thanked the deputy for telling me. He offered his condolences, said they'd keep me posted about any investigation. I boarded the bus and sat at the back, feeling half alive. Each time someone new got on, I watched them warily, expecting that grin, that humming. The bus rolled through endless farmland and onto the highway. The driver turned on some local station, the static fading in and out. My eyes drifted shut, and for a moment I thought I heard that melody in the hiss of static. When I opened my eyes, everything was normal. I tried to calm my pounding heart. Days later, I'm still trying to piece together what happened out there. Something, or multiple things, lurk in that grassland, able to mimic human faces, able to wear them like costumes. I keep replaying Chris's last hours, the rotting supplies, the bizarre illusions of time. It's as if the land itself was bending reality. I don't know if there's a name for it, skinwalker, shapeshifter, something older. All I know is that it's out there and it can follow you. It can take the faces of the people you trust. Sometimes I wonder if I crippled the creature when I swung that machete, or if it's still prowling, waiting for me in every shadow. I'll never forget that final sight of the battered outpost porch, the men with black fluid leaking from their wounds, all wearing the same grin. I don't know if I escaped fully, or if I brought a piece of that nightmare with me. Because sometimes, late at night, I hum a strange tune without realizing it. Then I remember who first hummed it, and I feel the pull of time unraveling just a bit at the corners of my mind. I'm telling this because I can't keep it inside anymore. My name is Jack Morris. I'm 28 years old. This happened in October 2023 on a trip that was supposed to help me find peace. Instead, I found a horror that refuses to leave me. If you're ever traveling near the Santa Fe Trail, in the lonely stretches of Cimarron National Grassland, beware. If you see a friendly face in the distance, or hear a voice that sounds like your own, call for help. Or better yet, run. Because once it sets its sights on you, there's no promise that anyone who comes back is who they claim to be. And sometimes, they don't come back at all. My name is James Carter. I'm 31 years old. This happened in May of last year, 2022. I was not a veteran or some backwoods survivalist by any stretch. I was an IT consultant from Wichita who decided to find solace in the wilderness. I was dealing with my own demons, most notably the guilt surrounding my brother Caleb's death. It still pains me to say that out loud even now. I was just desperate for some quiet. a chance to reset and maybe connect with him in spirit if that was possible. I'm not sure where I first got the notion that hiking alone might help me come to terms with everything, but that's what I did. I packed up my German Shepherd, Ranger, loaded some supplies, and drove out to Elk City State Park in southeastern Kansas. I'd heard about Elk City's Table Mound Trail. Some said it was moderately challenging. Others said it was perfect for a weekend getaway if you didn't mind rough camping. That was enough for me. I'd told a few friends from work that I would be gone a couple of nights. No big deal. Maybe I'd spot some wildlife, write in my journal, read from Caleb's old poetry book, and do a little fishing by the lake. Looking back, it all sounds so innocent. Nothing about that place or the events I experienced was innocent in the end. Ranger sat in the passenger seat with his nose pressed to the window for most of the drive. I always believed dogs could sense more than humans, which was probably why he kept turning his head to look at me as if to say, "Are we sure about this, buddy?" But I ignored those small tremors of doubt. By the time I reached the trailhead, the afternoon sun was still high. The temperature hovered around 70 degrees. I parked in a small gravel lot near the sign that said Table Mound Trail, though no other vehicles were there. That should have been my first clue that something was off. Mid-May, perfect weather, and no other hikers. But I shrugged it off and made sure I had everything. Backpack, tent, sleeping bag, enough rations for 2 days, water, and a small collapsible dog bowl for Ranger. I left my phone at around 80% battery and stashed an external battery pack in my bag. The plan was simple. Hike a few miles, set up camp, enjoy the serenity, then loop back by Sunday evening. I remember the first stretch being uneventful. Ranger trotted happily ahead, occasionally stopping to sniff or mark territory. I listened to the wind weaving through the leaves. Every so often, I heard a distant rustling, likely squirrels or rabbits. There was a hush in the forest that I found comforting, almost like the trees were holding their breath to let me pass. The trail was well worn, but I also had a map just in case. Between that and my phone's GPS, I was confident we wouldn't get lost. As evening approached, I settled on a flat patch of ground not far from a small creek. I set up my one-person tent, laid out Ranger's blanket outside, and started a small fire with some dry wood I gathered. One of the reasons I'd come out there was to write in my journal. That night, I remember scribbling a few lines about Caleb. Specifically, I wrote, "I keep expecting you to call me. I hate myself for that." My brother had taken his own life months before, and that phone call from the hospital telling me they found him still haunted me. Ranger rested by the fire while I stared into the flames. I thought I heard faint whispers, but it could have just been the wind in the branches overhead. Then again, maybe it was that sixth sense telling me the forest wasn't as empty as it seemed. I'm not superstitious, but an odd chill ran through me. That was when I noticed Ranger's ears perk up. He let out a low, uneasy growl. I didn't see or hear anything unusual, so I tried to calm him. Eventually, he settled back down. Still, the feeling that something was off lingered around the edges of my mind. I turned in early, leaving the embers of the fire to burn themselves out. Inside the tent, I used my small lantern to write a bit more. How I wanted to find closure with Caleb. The idea was silly in retrospect. Closure is a myth. But I let the optimism guide me to sleep. It must have been a few hours later when I woke up to Ranger snarling from inside the tent. I'd let him sleep at the entrance, half in and half out, but now he had his back pressed against me, hackles raised. The hair on my arms stood on end from the sound. I fumbled for the lantern and flicked it on. That was when I heard the whisper, close enough to make me bolt upright. "James." Not a sigh, not the wind. My name in the soft voice of my dead brother. My chest tightened. I could hardly breathe. Ranger barked, lunged forward, and nearly tore through the thin tent material, but I grabbed his collar. My heart was pounding so fast it hurt. I forced myself to crawl out and check around with my lantern. Nothing. Just the rustle of leaves and the glint of the creek in the moonlight. No footprints, no sign of any other person. The fire pit was dead ash. I told myself it had to be a dream. The nights can play tricks on you, especially when you're sleeping half on roots and your mind is far from calm. Eventually, I coaxed Ranger back to bed, though he refused to lie down fully. Every muscle in his body felt tense under my hand. He kept growling deep in his throat. I whispered, "It's okay, boy. It's just the wind," even though I didn't believe it. That night, I slept in fits, waking to the slightest sound. Morning came with a bright sun that burned away most of my unease. I tried to chalk up the incident to nightmares. After a quick breakfast of energy bars, I packed up the tent, checked my phone's battery. It was at 40%, which was odd because it hadn't been on all night. I tried to use the external battery pack, but for some reason, it wouldn't charge. I jiggled the cord, pressed the power button, still nothing. At the time, it felt more like an annoying inconvenience rather than a true warning. I decided to head deeper into the trail. I wanted to find an area off the beaten path for the second night, maybe by an overlook or somewhere with a decent view of the lake. The official trail was straightforward enough, but then I noticed my compass was slowly spinning, never settling on a direction. I tapped on the glass, thinking I might have dropped it or damaged it, but it kept rotating like something was interfering with its magnetism. I felt a flicker of worry in my gut. It's just an old compass, I reasoned, probably broken. I still had my phone's GPS, until I realized my phone also wasn't updating my location. The arrow refused to move from the parking lot. I toggled it on and off, tried airplane mode, but no dice. I told myself I'd keep going anyway. It was mid-morning, the sky clear, so I could navigate by the sun if I had to. Ranger seemed calmer, though he would occasionally stare off into the trees and let out a short whine. After hiking for about 2 hours, I stumbled upon something that was definitely not on the official map. It was a small, circular stone structure, crumbling and moss-covered, set back from a dry creek bed. At first glance, I thought it might be an old well or root cellar from some long-abandoned settlement. The stones rose only to about waist level, forming a perfect circle about 8 feet wide. I approached cautiously. Ranger paced in circles around it, ears back. When I peeked inside, I saw something that made my stomach drop. It was a battered backpack that looked exactly like the one Caleb used in college. Same brand, same color scheme of green and black. That alone wouldn't have disturbed me too much. Lots of people own green backpacks. But the moment I touched it, I recognized a small patch Caleb had sewn on. A rearing horse. My heart hammered. This shouldn't be here. Caleb's backpack was supposed to be in storage at my apartment. Or maybe I donated it. I couldn't remember, but it definitely had no business being in the middle of the Kansas woods. Sweat broke out along my forehead. I unzipped the main compartment. The stench that hit me was like rotting meat. Wet, foul, thick enough to make me gag. Inside were lumps of rancid flesh or organs. I couldn't tell which. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle the vomit. Bile burned in the back of my throat, and I nearly dropped the pack altogether. Ranger whimpered, trying to pull me away as if he understood I shouldn't be touching it. I managed to zip it back up, but the reek remained in the air. Tears welled in my eyes, and I felt lightheaded. There was no explanation for why my dead brother's backpack, or something that looked identical, was here, filled with God knows what. My first irrational thought was that Caleb might still be alive out here, which made no sense. He was gone. We'd buried him. The second thought, this is a warning. Someone is messing with me or something. I decided I had to move on immediately. I didn't want to linger in this ruin, but some insane impulse made me drag the backpack out with me. Proof, I guess. I wanted to convince myself I wasn't hallucinating. I tied the pack to the outside of mine, covering it with a tarp to contain the smell. Then, with every step, the odor trailed behind me like a curse. I walked faster than intended, practically jogging with Ranger at my side. My sense of direction got muddled. The terrain felt unfamiliar. At one point, I thought I recognized a certain rock formation and realized I was going in circles. A 2-hour loop? That was impossible. I tried to consult my paper map, but for some reason, none of the landmarks lined up. I couldn't find the stone structure marked anywhere. The creeping sense of panic grew with every misstep. It was as though the forest had shifted or realigned itself. Sometime in the late afternoon, I came across a decent clearing to set up camp. Even though I wanted to get out of the woods entirely, I also knew nightfall was coming, and I didn't want to risk wandering aimlessly in the dark. I dropped my gear and tried to start a fire, only it wouldn't catch. Every match I lit flared out or hissed, even though the kindling was dry. After numerous attempts, I struck one match that made the flames run greenish-blue for a moment before fizzling. I couldn't explain it. The entire time, Ranger kept a wary distance, tail down, like he was spooked by the spot. Eventually, I used the last of my lighter fluid just to get a small flame going. It sputtered ominously, but it stayed lit long enough for me to heat some water for my freeze-dried meal. That meal was awful, tasted sour, and I couldn't tell if it was my own stress or if something was wrong with the water. I threw most of it away and tried to feed a little to Ranger, but he refused. When I checked my other supplies, I discovered they were spoiling. The bread was shot through with black mold that definitely hadn't been there that morning. The can of chicken I opened smelled rancid. I slammed the lid shut and buried it so Ranger wouldn't eat it by accident. It felt like everything was decaying faster in this place, or time was messing with me somehow. Night descended quickly, and I huddled in my tent. The silence of the woods pressed on my ears. Ranger was shaking, so I unzipped my sleeping bag to let him crawl in. It was the last moment I remember feeling anything approaching comfort. I dozed off with the lantern turned low, images of Caleb's face burning behind my eyelids. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The lantern had gone out. The tent was pitch black except for a faint glow from the moon outside. I reached for Ranger, but he wasn't there. The sleeping bag was unzipped, the flap hanging open, but from the inside, it was as if he'd wiggled free. I called, "Ranger?" My voice sounded too loud, almost frantic. There was no response, not even a whine. I pressed my ear to the tent wall, listening. I thought I heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. My brain immediately imagined a person creeping around camp. Then I recalled the voice from the previous night. Could that have been a real person? Could someone have gotten my brother's backpack just to torment me? My skin prickled with fear. I unzipped the tent and looked out. Ranger wasn't by the fire pit. The embers were dead. The forest was all shadows. I called for him again, adrenaline making me shake. Then I heard him bark in the distance, one sharp, pained bark that cut off abruptly. My legs nearly gave out. I grabbed my flashlight and scrambled out of the tent. The trees swallowed me as I ran, calling Ranger's name. The forest floor was uneven, covered in loose rocks and fallen branches. I must have stumbled a dozen times, scraping my hands and knees. Eventually, I found him. He was crouched in a small clearing, panting heavily. I swear, in the half-light of the moon, I saw blood on his muzzle. My first thought was he got attacked by a wild animal, maybe a coyote. But then I looked closer. There was no wound on him. The blood smelled fresh, metallic. His eyes were wild. He growled at me, confused, almost as if he didn't recognize me. I tried to calm him with the same gentle tone I'd used since he was a puppy. Slowly, he lowered his guard, and I was able to pull him close. The entire time, my heart hammered like it would burst. Something about the forest felt bigger, like the trees were looming inward, creating a dome of branches overhead. The next thing I saw froze my blood. Not more than 10 feet away, there was a wide streak of fresh blood on the ground, leading off deeper into the woods. I didn't know what it meant, but I sure as hell didn't want to find out right then. I coaxed Ranger to follow me back to camp. My flashlight flickered, but managed to hold out until we saw the glow of the tent's reflective strips. Once inside, I zipped the door behind us and held Ranger until morning, ignoring the smell of blood on his snout. I had no explanation for what had happened or what he might have done, but I told myself it was just an animal. He must have chased a rabbit or a possum, got carried away. Try not to think too much about it. When dawn broke, I emerged cautiously. The first thing I noticed was that the remains of the fire pit were cold. That was expected. What wasn't expected was my entire backpack missing, both my pack and the vile green and black one strapped to it. I scanned the area, thinking maybe an animal dragged them off, but that made no sense. Those packs were heavy. I searched for 20 minutes, screaming curses into the silent woods. Then I found them, leaning upright against a large oak tree about 100 yards away. They looked normal at first, but the minute I picked mine up, I realized everything inside was rotted. The water bladder reeked of sulfur. The freeze-dried packets were moldy. Even my spare socks and clothes felt damp and slimy. The green and black pack was empty. Whatever was inside, those hunks of flesh, had vanished, leaving only a foul stain that stung my nostrils when I unzipped it. Despite the day's warmth, I was trembling. Ranger refused to go anywhere near the packs, as if they radiated a malevolent heat. How is any of this possible? My rational mind tried to find logical explanations, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. I spent the next hour trying to find a new route out of the forest. If I had to, I'd walk in a straight line until I found a road or some sign of civilization. I wanted to be as far from that place as possible. My phone was dead, the external battery pack also dead. I was running low on water, and my sense of direction was shot. The sun seemed to move more quickly overhead, or maybe I was just losing track of time because of the terror. Around midday, I found a faint path that led uphill. Figuring a higher vantage point might help me spot the lake or the main trail, I followed it. It wound through thick underbrush and rocky terrain until, at the crest, I saw what looked like the remains of a small fire lookout. A wooden tower, maybe 30 feet tall, with boards missing from the steps. It didn't appear on the park map. A sign at the base read, "Condemned, no entry." The tower's roof looked half collapsed, but I thought the vantage might help me see Elk City Lake or maybe a road. Ranger seemed reluctant, but we went up anyway. The steps groaned under our weight. I could see large sections of rotted wood, nails sticking out. Every step felt like a gamble. Then I caught a whiff of something putrid from above, and I nearly turned back. But some mixture of desperation and curiosity pushed me onward. At the top, the platform was wide enough for me to stand and peer out over the treetops. I could see a sliver of water in the distance. Relief flooded me, but it was immediately overshadowed by the smell. When I glanced to the far side of the lookout, I froze. Ranger began whining. Lying there, partially covered by an old tarp, was my dog's body. My actual German Shepherd Ranger. He was dead, his torso torn open and hollowed out. The fur was unmistakable, the collar still around his neck, though the bright red color was stained dark with blood. His eyes were sunken, his jaws slack. I felt bile rise in my throat as I forced myself to take a shaky step closer. I could see the gory emptiness of his chest cavity, as though something had excavated his organs. The stench was unbearable. I dropped to my knees, my mind screaming that this couldn't be real. Ranger was right beside me, panting, whining, alive. I turned to the living dog and it stared back at me, tail tucked. Then, with trembling hands, I reached out to touch the corpse's collar. My vision blurred with tears when I read the name tag. Ranger. My entire body felt like it was on fire with confusion and horror. "What the hell?" I rasped, heart pounding so loud in my ears that I barely heard my own words. I stumbled backward away from the dead husk. The living ranger was still by my side, trembling just as much. My brain scrambled to rationalize. Could it be another dog? The same collar? Some sick joke? That was when I heard the footsteps on the stairs behind us. Heavy, deliberate steps climbing up. I turned, chest tight, and saw Caleb, except it wasn't him. My brother had been gone for months, and he certainly wouldn't be out here, pale and hollow-eyed. Yet there he stood, wearing the same navy hoodie I'd seen him wearing in the casket. His lips twisted into a too-wide grin, and his eyes glinted with a wrongness that knotted my guts. My entire body shook with adrenaline and revulsion. "Come home with me, Jamie," he said. That was something he used to say when we were kids, if we got into a fight somewhere at a friend's house. But hearing it now, in that rasping voice, made me want to bolt. He stepped closer, and the floorboards groaned. Ranger, the living one, lunged, snarling. But my brother's shape shifted with unnatural speed, morphing in the half-light. One moment it was Caleb. The next, it was an emaciated creature with elongated limbs and no discernible face, only a set of black, hollow eye sockets. Its chest was cracked open along the sternum, revealing something wet and pulsing underneath. Then it snapped back into the shape of my brother, as if wearing him like a suit. It beckoned me closer with a twitching hand. I tried to stand, stumbled, and nearly collapsed on the rotted boards. My only thought was to get away, down the steps, away from the horrifying evidence of the dog's body. I had no plan beyond that. The mimic or thing advanced, and with each step, the boards trembled as though about to give way. Ranger barked wildly, fangs bared, but it didn't deter the thing that looked like Caleb. In a panic, I reached for a broken chair leg I spotted on the tower floor, likely left by previous visitors. It was splintered at one end. The moment the figure was within reach, I lunged and drove the sharp end toward its midsection. I felt resistance, like hitting thick rubber, before it slid into something that hissed with a sizzling noise. The shape contorted, letting out a shriek that sounded exactly like my own voice. It echoed around the cramped tower space, making my ears ring. Then the shape drew back, staggering. For a split second, I saw the face of my brother's corpse, skin gray and sunken, lips parted as if in shock. I tore down the stairs, nearly tripping as Ranger stayed on my heels. The structure behind us groaned in protest. Halfway down, I felt the entire tower shudder. That unearthly shriek continued, louder than the rustling leaves, louder than my own heartbeat. When I reached the ground, I didn't stop running. I pushed through branches, thorns, anything in my way. My legs and arms were cut by twigs, scratched raw. Nothing mattered but getting away from that horror. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I realized my watch read 10:52 a.m. The position of the sun said it was late afternoon, maybe around 4 or 5. Something about time was definitely broken out here. The sinking feeling in my gut told me this entire forest was under the influence of that thing. The Hollow One, I started calling it in my mind. A mimic that found a way to feed off fear and grief, wearing my brother's visage to torment me, and apparently also messing with illusions of my dog's corpse. Or maybe that corpse was real. The memory of it made me want to scream until I collapsed. I wanted to keep moving, but my body was spent from adrenaline. I found a fallen log to sit on, and Ranger flopped down next to me, tongue lolling. He looked as exhausted as I felt. I wiped sweat from my forehead. The question hammered in my head, is this even my real dog? I tried not to linger on it, but the truth hovered at the edges of my awareness. If that horrifying, hollowed-out body was truly Ranger, then what was the creature beside me? My dog was right here. But was it? Then again, if that was an illusion, I refused to let it break me completely. In that moment, I decided that if this was my last stand, I would fight. One thing rang clear. I had to find that stone structure again. It felt like the source, or at least a focal point for whatever was happening. Destroying it might free the forest or break the loop. That idea suddenly seemed less crazy than continuing to run in circles. It took hours of stumbling around, all sense of direction lost, before I caught sight of that ruin again. The clearing looked even darker, as if the sun refused to shine on the stones. Ranger let out a low whine. My hands shook as I approached the circle. It was silent. No wind, no birds, no buzzing insects. I could see that the stones were carved with strange markings I hadn't noticed before. They looked like runes or symbols, deeply etched and filled with some tar-like substance. In the center, a small pile of wood had been arranged, almost like a ritual pyre. I hesitated for a moment, not knowing how to proceed. Finally, I searched my pockets and realized I only had a few matches left, plus the dregs of lighter fluid in the canister I'd used earlier. I soaked the wooden pile as best I could with what was left. The reek was acrid. Then I struck a match. The first one fizzled out immediately. The second match caught but flared a sickly green before dying. My heart hammered. I tried the last match. It ignited, sputtering, but held. I touched it to the edge of the soaked wood and a flame hissed to life. It crackled, emitting noxious black smoke that made my eyes water. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard a faint wail that seemed to come from beneath the earth. The stones vibrated under my feet. A cold wind blasted through the clearing, swirling ash and sparks in a vortex. Ranger whimpered, shrinking back. I covered my mouth, trying not to inhale the foul smoke. The runes on the stones began to glow a dull red, as if reflecting hidden embers. I realized I was trembling. This was beyond anything I understood. The wailing grew louder, rising to a deafening pitch until I recognized it as the same shriek I'd heard in the tower. My own voice, twisted and amplified. I saw shapes flicker in the smoke. Caleb's face contorted in pain. My mother, long dead, her mouth stretched in a silent scream. An older version of me, eyes hollow. Each vision passed in a heartbeat, but they left me reeling. My lungs burned from the fumes. Then it emerged. Whether it crawled from under the stones or simply appeared, I'm not sure. It was in the form of a lanky figure with no discernible features, just a stretched face with hollow sockets where eyes should be. I could see the outline of a chest, split open down the middle, inside a swirling darkness. It took a step forward. I could hear the wet sound of something sliding within its ribcage. I screamed at it, or maybe I was screaming at the horror of the entire situation. Ranger barked, braver than me, charging the thing, but the creature swung a long arm, knocking him aside with terrifying force. I heard a yelp as Ranger tumbled across the ground. My stomach flipped, remembering the corpse in the tower, and I feared that the blow might have killed him. The creature advanced on me with jerky, impossible movements, limbs clicking. Up close, I saw rows of spines or teeth lining the open chest cavity. An acrid stench of rot emanated from it, making me gag. I groped on the ground for a rock or a stick. anything to defend myself. My fingers closed on a loose stone. I hurled it at the thing's chest. It barely reacted, only letting out a distorted moan that sounded like my brother's voice. Then it lunged. I rolled to the side, feeling one of its arms slash across my back, slicing through fabric and skin. Pain flared, bright and scalding. I staggered, dropping to one knee as blood trickled down my ribs. The flames in the circle leaped higher, as though feeding on our struggle. Sparks flew in all directions, igniting nearby grass. A ring of fire began to form around the ruin. Smoke billowed, choking me. With tears streaming down my face, I pulled out the broken chair leg I'd been carrying. Pointed end sharpened with desperation. I used the last of my strength to drive it into the creature's chest. The tip slid between those awful spines with a wet crunch. The creature shrieked again in that half-human, half-demonic wail, and for a moment I felt like I might pass out from the sheer volume. I twisted the makeshift stake, ignoring the burn in my injured shoulder. The creature's body convulsed, arms flailing. Dark fluid gushed from the wound, splattering my clothes. Then it jerked backward, trying to free itself, and the stake tore further into its chest cavity. It collapsed to its knees, still shrieking. My hearing went fuzzy, like an overload of sound. In the flickering light of the fire, I saw it flail and then begin to crumble, as if its body were made of old bark and ash. Fragments of it peeled off, dissolving in the air until only the stake remained, driven through a caved-in ribcage. And in the next heartbeat, that too disintegrated, leaving nothing but scorched ground. It was over. The ring of fire sputtered as if starving for fuel, then died back into embers. The swirling ashes settled. I stood there, panting, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My mind refused to fully comprehend. I wanted to believe it was all a nightmare, but the searing pain in my side and the stench of my clothes told me this was real enough. Then I remembered Ranger. I stumbled over to where he lay. He was breathing shallowly, a whine escaping his throat. I ran my trembling hands over him, found no mortal wound, just bruising and maybe a fractured rib. Tears of relief and horror flooded my eyes. I whispered apologies, promising I'd get him out of there. My entire world narrowed to that single mission: escape. Nothing else mattered anymore. I left the ruin behind, smoke rising from the smoldering remains of whatever unholy ground that was. My adrenaline was fading, replaced by sharp, grating pain in my back, but I forced my feet to keep moving. Every step felt heavier than the last as we trudged through the forest. A few times, I saw glimpses of grotesque shapes in the corner of my vision. Caleb's face, a dead version of Ranger, a reflection of my own battered form, flickering like illusions, or ghosts left behind by the entity. I told myself they were just echoes, powerless now. Time blurred. I don't know how many hours or days passed. The sky seemed to cycle between dusk and dawn faster than I could keep track. At some point, delirious and dehydrated, I collapsed near a small stream. I forced a bit of the water down my throat, ignoring the risk that it might not be safe. I had no other choice. Eventually, I stumbled into a clearing that connected to a narrow dirt road. Seeing that road felt like a dream. Ranger limped beside me, every breath a ragged pant. I followed the road, half expecting it to loop back into the forest, but it didn't. After another hour or so, a green county truck appeared in the distance, dust kicking up behind it. I remember waving my arms frantically, collapsing to my knees as the truck screeched to a halt. They found me delirious, raving about monsters and hollow chests and rotting backpacks. The driver, some county worker checking on flood zones, was shocked but kind enough to call an ambulance. I don't remember much else until I woke up in a hospital in Independence, Kansas. The doctors said I had severe dehydration, multiple lacerations on my back, early-stage infection, and signs of delirium. Ranger was taken to a nearby vet who told me he had a cracked rib and internal bruising, but he'd survive with rest. A sheriff's deputy questioned me about what happened out there. I tried explaining, but I'm sure it sounded like the ramblings of a madman. They launched a search, found the campsite I described, but no trace of the stone ruin or the old tower. The deputy showed me pictures from their phones. Just trees, open ground, nothing else. They asked if maybe I had gotten lost and injured myself in a fall. I didn't argue. It was pointless. I had no proof except my wounds and Ranger's battered body. I've since left Kansas, unable to handle the memories. I still wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I hear my brother whispering my name. I see shadows shift in the corners of my apartment. Sometimes, late at night, Ranger growls at the walls. I've tried to tell myself it's over, that I destroyed it, that I crippled the creature or exorcised it from those woods. But a small gnawing part of me worries that it wasn't enough, that it's still out there waiting for me. And it knows me, intimately. It knows my grief, my guilt, it fed on them. The doctors say I have PTSD. My therapist recommends exposure therapy, writing everything down as a form of catharsis. So I did, meticulously describing every smell, every sound, every horrifying detail. People who read this might dismiss it as a hallucination or an elaborate nightmare spurred by grief and exhaustion. I wish I could believe that, but I know the truth in my bones. I still have nightmares about that tower. In my dreams, I climb the creaking steps, and at the top lies the hollowed-out body of my dog. The floor is slick with blood, and there's a figure standing beside me. When it turns, it has my face. Then it says in my brother's voice, "You've been mine since the first night." That's when I wake up, drenched in sweat, sometimes screaming. Even now, when I look in the mirror, I sometimes see something flicker behind my eyes, a darkness that wasn't there before. I can't help wondering, did I really kill it, or did I just break off a piece of myself and leave it in those woods? Either way, one thing is certain. It remembers me. It always remembers. And I'm terrified it might want me back. My name is Megan Thorne. I'm 37 years old. This happened in August of last year, 2023. I was trying to get my life back on track after surviving a car accident that left me with permanent nerve damage in my right leg and a mountain of guilt in my head. As a former wildlife photographer, I used to travel all over the country, capturing images of rare animals and expansive landscapes. That was before the accident, before I started to doubt whether I had the courage to keep doing the job I loved. So, in a fit of stubbornness or misplaced determination, take your pick, I decided to attempt a solo RV trip across the Midwest, convinced that the open roads and quiet parks would soothe the lingering ache in my leg and the heavier ache in my heart. I chose Webster State Park in Kansas almost at random. I'd heard it was quiet, less crowded than the more famous parks in the region, and nestled around a reservoir that offered decent fishing and scenic views. It sounded perfect for someone like me who wanted peace and hated the pitying stares of well-meaning strangers. I wanted to hole up in my small vintage RV with my golden retriever Banjo, and maybe snap a few pictures if I felt up to it. Then I would move on to the next place, and the next, slowly reclaiming the independence I'd once taken for granted. The first sign that something was off came before I even pulled into the campsite. I'd relied on my phone's GPS the whole drive from Wichita, but the signal kept dropping as I neared the park boundary. By the time I reached the main gate, the screen was frozen on an old map, refusing to update. I muttered a curse under my breath, blamed rural coverage, and kept going. I drove down a narrow paved road that soon gave way to gravel, the washboard texture rattling every dish in my RV cupboards. Banjo sat in the passenger seat, panting in excitement, his nose smudging the window. He seemed less troubled by the rough ride than I was. Eventually, I found a sign marking an official campground with RV hookups. But I also saw a smaller sign advertising a more primitive camping loop farther along, near an older, less maintained part of the park. The temptation to be left alone tugged at me, so I followed the lonely gravel road deeper into the trees, letting thick branches stretch overhead like a natural archway. Wind rustled the leaves in long sighs. I remember glancing at the sky through my windshield. It was a hazy day, the sun barely a pale disk behind a film of gray clouds. The air felt oddly still between gusts of wind, as if the world were holding its breath. When I arrived at the primitive loop, I found exactly 2 campsites with old, cracked picnic tables. One had a faded sign reading, "No water, use at own risk." Perfect. I parked, shut off the engine, and stepped outside, leaning heavily on my right leg for a moment while the tingling pain set in. Banjo leapt out after me, nose to the ground, investigating. The place looked deserted, which suited me fine. My phone was down to 1 bar of signal, and no matter how I turned or angled it, I couldn't get any better reception. I told myself I didn't mind. If this was about regaining my self-reliance, then so be it. I spent the rest of that afternoon setting up. My RV was old but cozy. A retro turquoise stripe on white paint, a small kitchenette, a bed in the back, a tiny bathroom. I plugged in my generator to charge its battery. I set out a folding chair for stargazing later. I even considered unrolling my old sleeping bag by the picnic table, remembering times I would sleep out under the stars for a better sunrise photo. A wave of sadness stopped me. I realized I hadn't done any serious photography since the accident. The battered Pelican case with my camera gear was stowed in a cabinet, as though it belonged to someone else. I was just starting to wonder if maybe I should muster the courage to pull out that gear when a battered pickup rolled up. The driver, a man maybe in his early 40s, gave me a wave and a friendly nod. I felt a stab of annoyance, but I forced myself to be polite. I was supposed to be practicing social interactions after all. "Hey there," he called out through the open window. "Didn't expect to see anyone else up this far." "Hi," I said, stepping closer. Banjo trotted ahead of me and gave a tentative sniff at the tires. I wanted somewhere quiet. Guess I found it. He grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. He wore a ball cap with a fish logo on it and had a fishing rod leaning across the passenger seat. "Jason," he said, extending a hand. "I come up here for the fishing sometimes. Webster's got some catfish, some stripers, the good stuff." "Megan," I replied, shaking his hand. I found myself liking his casual, easygoing manner. He tipped his cap in a small gesture. "Be careful around the old trails, though," Jason said, glancing at the darkening sky. "Storm front's coming in, and it's easy to lose track of where you are." He paused, as if weighing whether to say more. Wind's been weird lately. Locals call it the screaming trees. More of a campfire story than anything. You know how folks like to talk." I forced a polite smile. "Screaming trees, huh? Sounds like the park's got some local color." Truth be told, the phrase unsettled me more than I let on. He nodded. "Just mind the weather, and if you need help, you probably won't get any cell service out here. You can usually find me by the lake or at the ranger station if it's open." I thanked him for the warning. After a moment of awkward chatter, he wished me luck and drove off. Banjo watched the truck disappear into the stand of cedars, then trotted back to me, tail wagging. I looked around at the deepening shadows. Something about the wind made me uneasy, but I tried to ignore it. It was barely past 4 in the afternoon, yet the day already felt like it was draining color, as if we were closer to dusk than we should be. I decided to take a short walk with Banjo and see if I could find a decent vantage point for photos, just in case I mustered the courage to dust off my camera gear. My leg ached after a few minutes, but I pushed through the pain, letting Banjo sniff at logs and chase after grasshoppers. We followed a narrow dirt path into the trees, stepping around fallen branches and half-buried rocks. The wind did rise at times, whispering through the canopy. Maybe if I'd never heard Jason's phrase, I wouldn't have paid any mind. But as it was, I found myself listening, half expecting to hear something like a distant wail or cry in that breeze. That was ridiculous, of course. I chalked it up to nerves. We didn't go far. In about 15 minutes, the path dead-ended at a thick cluster of oak and elm trees. Past them, I glimpsed a shallow ravine littered with deadfall. The terrain looked uneven and, frankly, too challenging for my injured leg to tackle alone. Rather than risk further pain, I decided we'd seen enough. We turned around, aiming back for the campsite. The wind rattled the branches overhead, and I could have sworn I heard a faint moan. Banjo's ears perked, and his hackles stood up slightly. I told myself it was just the rustle of leaves. By the time we returned, the sky had dimmed to a slate gray, heavy with clouds. The generator sputtered, some mechanical cough that I didn't like. I fiddled with the settings, but couldn't get it to run smoothly. After a few attempts, I managed to coax it into a weak but steady hum. Good enough for now, I thought. I had a small stash of battery-powered lights if things got worse. That night, I heated up canned soup on the RV's tiny stove. The park was profoundly quiet. No other campers, no staff vehicles. If I stared into the dark for too long, I started to see shapes moving between the tree trunks, illusions conjured by the faint glow of my lantern. Banjo seemed restless, pacing more than usual. Thunder growled in the distance, and lightning flashed somewhere past the reservoir. I tried to distract myself by reading a paperback novel, but my mind drifted to Angela, my younger sister. We hadn't spoken much in the months before she died. She'd struggled with severe depression and ended up taking her own life. That was a separate heartbreak from my accident, yet the two traumas melded in my head. I'd never properly grieved her. I always felt partially responsible, as if my inattention, my busy schedule, had contributed to her last days of desperation. I fought against those thoughts, but they chewed at the corners of my mind until I put the book down, rubbed my temples, and decided to get some sleep instead. I turned off the stove, locked the RV door, and settled Banjo in his dog bed at the foot of my own. Rain began to tap against the windows, soft at first, then harder. The wind picked up, hissing around corners. I must have dozed off in a swirl of uneasy dreams because I woke with a jolt sometime after midnight. It took me a second to realize what tore me from sleep. A strange scraping sound against the RV door. My heart hammered. Banjo let out a low growl, the fur on his neck stiff. I pulled myself upright, ignoring the flare of pain in my leg. My first thought was that maybe Jason had come back, or an animal was scratching outside. But deep down, I knew neither explanation made perfect sense. Grabbing a small flashlight, I tiptoed to the door. Banjo followed, still growling deep in his throat. I flicked the outside light switch. Through the window, I saw nothing but swirling rain. I waited, holding my breath, but the scrape didn't come again. The only sound was the ping-ping-ping of raindrops on the RV roof. I cracked open the door a couple of inches and shone my flashlight around. A wave of wind-driven rain stung my face, but I saw no footprints in the mud, no animals scurrying away, nothing. Feeling exposed, I shut the door, locked it, and double-checked the windows. Banjo kept pacing, nails clicking on the linoleum floor. I barely slept the rest of that night. Sometime around 4 in the morning, the storm moved on. In the sudden quiet, I drifted off into a fretful doze. When I woke again, a pale dawn light seeped through the RV blinds. My watch read 7:10 a.m. I yawned, stiff and sore, and hopped outside to see if there was any damage from the storm. I almost dropped my coffee mug when I spotted deep scratches on the outer surface of the RV door. 4 parallel gouges, each about 8 inches long, carved into the paint and metal as if by massive claws or a blade. I ran my fingertips over them, feeling how they bit clear through the top layer. My stomach lurched. "Banjo," I muttered, though I knew the dog had been inside with me the whole time. These marks were too large to be from raccoons or coyotes. If it was a person, why use 4 distinct cuts spaced in a pattern like an animal's paw? My mind went to the worst possible place. Some twisted individual might be watching me, messing with me. The idea made me glance around in paranoia, but there was only the quiet camp, the distant shoreline of the reservoir, and a scolding crow perched on a tree branch. I spent an hour taking pictures of the scratches with my phone, mostly out of a need to document them. No signal meant I couldn't call the rangers. The generator was still struggling, providing enough juice to keep my fridge going, but not much else. My nerves were on edge. I gave Banjo a can of dog food, forced myself to down half a granola bar, and decided maybe I'd head toward the lake to see if I could find Jason or anyone else. The idea of traveling deeper into the park, though, stirred a queasy sense of foreboding in me. Yet, staying here felt worse. With Banjo on a leash, I followed the gravel road for about half a mile until it forked. One path led to the main gate, the other to the reservoir. My plan was to check the boat ramp or the fishing docks first. The day was hot and muggy, thick with leftover humidity from last night's storm. The sky had cleared to a painful, glaring brightness, and sweat trickled down my back within minutes. The pain in my leg sharpened, forcing me to limp more pronouncedly. Banjo trotted ahead, panting, occasionally pulling me toward a particularly intriguing smell. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was the sense that the trees themselves were leaning in, and the leaves rustled like they were whispering secrets. I glanced behind me more than once, but there was never anyone there. We passed old, weather-beaten signs about fishing limits and trail regulations. One large wooden billboard featured a map of the park, though it looked so sun-faded and vandalized with marker scrawls that it was barely legible. Still, I managed to glean the general layout. We were near the southwestern edge of the park. The main boat ramp was another mile down. That mile felt like 10. By the time we reached the water's edge, my leg was screaming for a break. I found a small fishing dock, empty, but for a half-rotten folding chair and some beer cans. No sign of Jason or any other fishermen. I sat on the dock, letting my throbbing leg dangle, while Banjo drank from the reservoir shallows. The water was calm, reflecting the sky in a murky sort of mirror. The only movement was the occasional ripple from fish snapping at insects. I called out once or twice, "Hello, anyone here?" My voice echoed unanswered. The sense of isolation made my skin prickle. In all my previous travels, I'd never felt so unseen. This part of the park was absolutely deserted. Jason's mention of the screaming trees floated back into my thoughts, and I tried to tell myself it was just a local legend. People talk about ghost stories in every rural corner of America. Yet, I couldn't deny the bizarre events. The phone dying, the generator problems, the scratches on my RV door, the feeling of being watched. Something was off. I debated returning to the RV or pushing on to find the ranger station. The park map suggested the station was somewhere near the main entrance, a longer walk that I wasn't sure my leg could handle. Banjo seemed eager to move, whining and pacing. Maybe he sensed my anxiety. With a final glance across the water, I stood, wincing at a jolt of pain, and started back up the gravel road. A rancid odor drifted on the breeze when we passed a cluster of tall reeds near the shore. I peered in, expecting maybe a dead fish, but saw only rotting vegetation. In my unsettled mood, the stench felt ominous. We trudged back toward the campsite in midday heat. By the time we got there, I was drenched in sweat. I reached into the RV for a bottle of water and realized something was amiss. The interior smelled faintly sour, like spoiled food. I opened the small fridge and nearly gagged. My groceries were covered in a greenish-black mold that had spread overnight. The sealed cheese, the deli meat, even the sealed milk carton. Everything had rotted unnaturally fast. The temperature display read 40 degrees, which should have kept the food safe for longer. Horror stabbed through me. I yanked out the trash bag and disposed of all of it, retching at the stench. I checked the rest of my supplies. Granola bars, vacuum-sealed items. Most were still okay, but a few showed early signs of mold. I couldn't explain it. Furious and scared, I tried to start the generator again, only for it to sputter once and then go completely dead. I had enough battery power in the RV's backup to keep the lights on a bit, but not for the fridge or air conditioning. The inside would be sweltering by nightfall. That was when I spotted fresh scratches along the back panel, near the exhaust vent. They were shallower, but unmistakably similar. Something, or someone, was targeting my RV, creeping around while I was gone. My heart pounded with raw fear. I grabbed a tire iron from my toolbox and circled the campsite, half expecting to find a lurking figure in the underbrush. But the only movement was the wind stirring the pines. The hours dragged on. I realized I was stuck, unless I wanted to attempt driving the RV back out. With the generator out of commission, I had to rely on the engine battery alone, and that was risky. A part of me wanted to abandon the entire trip, just get in, drive away, and never look back. But my pride flared. I'd come here to prove something to myself, to face my isolation head-on. I didn't want to run at the first sign of adversity. Besides, what if the engine itself wouldn't start? The campsite was miles from the main road, with no phone service to call for help. As evening approached, storm clouds gathered again, painting the sky a bruised purple. Thunder rumbled, and I felt the barometric pressure shift. Banjo paced around the site, tail low, nose lifted to the wind. I decided the best course was to hunker down, lock the RV, and wait out the weather. My mind spun with paranoia. What if that thing that scratched my door came back? I double-checked my kitchen drawers and found a small camping knife. Hardly a comfort, but better than nothing. Night fell rapidly, as if someone had pulled a dark curtain over the sky. Rain hammered down, and soon everything was drenched in the gloom. My small battery-powered lantern cast feeble light inside the RV, shadows dancing on the walls. Banjo curled at my feet, ears flicking at every sound. When lightning flashed, the interior lit up in harsh, strobe-like bursts. Each time, I thought I saw shapes move just outside the windows. Tree branches, I told myself, or illusions caused by the rain. Sometime after 10, I heard Banjo growl at the door again. My stomach knotted. I shut off the lantern, hoping to remain unseen. Lightning flickered, revealing a tall shape pressed against the side of the RV. It was just for an instant, but it was enough. A silhouette, lanky, with a strange tilt to its head, then darkness returned. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out the thunder. Banjo barked ferociously. I braced myself, tire iron in hand, listening for a forced entry. Then a monstrous scream erupted outside, blending with the wind and rain so it hardly sounded human. It made my blood run cold. I stared at Banjo, who was trembling. Part of me wanted to fling open the door and face whatever was out there. Another part wanted to cower until dawn. Before I could decide, the RV rocked slightly as though something shoved it. My breath caught in my throat. Another flash of lightning. This time, I saw no silhouette, but a wide smear of muddy handprints on the window. Handprints arranged in parallel rows, like the ones that might belong to a creature with elongated fingers. Then, just as quickly as it began, the rocking stopped. No more shrieks, only the pounding rain remained. I sank onto the built-in bench, my heart hammering so loudly I could hardly think. It felt like an eternity passed before I found the courage to peek out the window. Another flash of lightning revealed nothing, no shapes, no footprints, just the puddle-strewn campsite. But the muddy handprints remained on the glass, proof that I wasn't hallucinating. My chest tightened with dread. I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, thunder jolted me back awake. Banjo whimpered, pressing his body against me for comfort. I stroked his fur, telling him it would be okay, though I didn't believe it. At some point in the dead of night, I dreamed of Angela. She stood outside the RV in the rain, wearing the same clothes she'd worn the last time I saw her alive. Her eyes were hollow, her cheeks sunken. Lightning flashed, and when it did, her face contorted into something else. Tree bark fused with rotting flesh. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. I woke, gasping. Couldn't sleep again for hours. The following morning arrived in a dull haze. The storm had passed, leaving behind a muddy landscape that smelled of wet earth and decay. I walked around the RV, searching for more damage. Sure enough, fresh gouges marred the paint near the front fender. It looked like something had slammed the side with a blunt object. My entire body was tense with fear and exhaustion. Banjo limped a little, probably from slipping on the wet floor during the night's chaos. I decided I had to leave. Pride be damned. This was beyond me. I threw my possessions into the RV's cabinets haphazardly. Pain pulsed in my leg, but adrenaline kept me moving. When I turned the key in the ignition, the engine coughed and died. I tried again. This time it rumbled to life, but the dashboard lights flickered in a worrisome pattern, and the check engine light glowed. My breath caught in my chest. I prayed it would last long enough for me to get out of the park. One problem? The gravel road leading back to the main route was now slick with mud. Deep ruts filled with water. The RV's tires spat gravel for a while, managing a quarter-mile before we hit a steep, muddy incline. I tried to floor it, but the wheels spun, the engine whining. Banjo whimpered, nails skittering on the passenger seat. We slid backward with a sickening lurch, nearly jackknifing. My heart pounded as I wrestled the steering wheel, trying to keep us from sliding into a ditch. After a harrowing struggle, I managed to roll the RV back onto a somewhat level spot. I tried again, same result. We were stuck, the tires spinning helplessly. I sat there, trembling with frustration, staring at the muddy slope. Maybe with chains or something I could get traction, but I didn't have the equipment. My phone still showed no signal. I considered hiking to find Jason or the ranger station, but that might mean leaving Banjo behind or risking an even more dangerous trek. Desperation and fear clashed in my mind. Eventually, I decided to park the RV in a flatter area near the tree line where I'd seen a partial dirt path that might lead deeper into the park. Maybe there was a route around the ridge. It was a slim hope, but what else could I do? Banjo and I set out on foot, leaving the RV locked up behind us. I carried a small backpack with water, a first aid kit, and the tire iron. The path was overgrown. lined with tall grasses that soaked our legs. My injured right leg protested with each step, sending jolts of pain up my spine. I kept going, swallowing the discomfort. Soon enough, the path twisted into a denser patch of forest. The tree trunks rose up like silent sentinels, blocking out the morning light. The wind rustled overhead, a faint moaning echo that set my teeth on edge. I tried to recall Jason's words about the screaming trees. I felt them now, pressing in from all sides. About an hour into the walk, we came across a sign half buried in brush. CCC Building Ruins, 1 mile. The Civilian Conservation Corps used to build structures in parks decades ago, and apparently some ruins were left. Possibly a way to find a road. I followed the arrow. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. No birdsong, no insects buzzing, just the hush of leaves and the distant rustle of wind. Banjo stopped occasionally, hackles raised, letting out a low whine. I had the eerie sense that we were not alone. Suddenly, we emerged into a small clearing, ringed with twisted, gnarled trees. The ground was scattered with old stone foundations, remnants of a barracks or storage building maybe. Vines and moss covered the stones, giving them the look of ancient ruins. In the center stood an archway that might once have been a doorway. It looked like nature had swallowed the place. The air was oppressive, thick with a smell like decaying leaves and something else, something sour. I circled the clearing, scanning for any sign of a path forward. That was when I noticed Banjo was no longer at my side. Panic flared. I called out, "Banjo, here, boy!" My voice echoed, and I realized how alone I was. A faint bark reached me from behind a cluster of brush. I scrambled over fallen stones, ignoring the stab of pain in my leg, and found Banjo standing by a low, partially collapsed wall. He was growling, his stance rigid. I peered over the wall. What I saw made my stomach lurch. Jason's baseball cap and fishing rod were strewn on the damp ground, spattered with something dark. Mud, maybe, but it looked too red. My pulse quickened. "Jason?" I called. No answer. Banjo sniffed the ground, let out a short bark, then froze, tail tucked. I saw footprints in the mud, leading deeper into a thick stand of trees. They weren't distinct enough to identify clearly, but they dragged oddly, like someone had been limping or pulled along. Fighting the urge to flee, I followed the footprints with Banjo at my side. They wound through a tangle of weeds before ending abruptly at the mouth of a narrower trail. My ears picked up a sound, soft sobbing or moaning. I parted the branches, stepping onto the path. The smell of rot intensified. We rounded a bend, and there was Jason. At least, it looked like him. He was hunched against a tree trunk, wide-eyed, mouth agape. Mud and blood smeared his clothes. His left arm bent at an impossible angle, like it was broken in multiple places. My breath hitched. I rushed forward, intending to help, but Banjo blocked me with a sudden bark. Jason's head jerked up and the whimpering stopped. Our gazes locked, and something in the pit of my stomach twisted. His eyes were wrong, dull, distant, like a marionette's eyes. Slowly, a grin spread across his face. Then his jaw opened, and the strangest, most agonizing sound emerged. A high-pitched wail that seemed to echo in the trees. The wind gusted, making the branches rattle overhead. My instincts screamed to back away. Banjo's bark turned to a frightened whine. Jason staggered to his feet. I could see bone jutting through the torn skin of his arm, but he moved as though he didn't feel any pain at all. He took one lurching step toward me. I raised the tire iron, voice shaking. "Jason, stop. You're hurt. Let me help you?" He responded with another wailing moan, sounding like the wind come to life. Then he lunged. I screamed and swung the tire iron, connecting with his shoulder. The impact felt sickeningly solid, but Jason barely flinched. His body jerked, and for a moment I saw something moving beneath his shirt, like writhing roots or cords. My mind reeled in horror. Banjo sprang forward, barking and snapping at Jason's legs, but Jason kicked him aside with unnatural strength. Panic and adrenaline took over. I swung again, aiming for his chest. This time, I struck him hard enough that he stumbled back, letting out that shriek again. Only it sounded layered, like multiple voices overlapped. With eyes wide, I saw his shape flicker, as if the form he wore was a shell. For a split second, a tall, root-like figure seemed to protrude from Jason's body. Bark skin contorted into multiple screaming mouths. Then Jason collapsed, or was pulled back inside that thing. I lost my nerve. Grabbing Banjo by the collar, I fled back to the clearing. We ran, me hobbling and crying, Banjo whimpering at my side. Every beat of my heart felt like it was about to explode from fear. I don't know how far or how long we sprinted, but we ended up on another path that twisted even deeper into the forest. The sky overhead grew darker, though it was barely midday. I stumbled over roots and slick mud, each misstep sending pain lancing up my leg. My breath came in ragged gasps, but I couldn't stop. Occasionally, I heard that moaning wail behind us, following at a distance. At last, we burst into a place that felt different. The trees formed a near-perfect ring, stunted and gnarled, their trunks knotted together as if in agony. Their bare branches grew thick overhead, weaving into a nearly solid canopy, creating a dim twilight beneath them. I didn't realize we were standing in a shallow depression until I noticed the ground sloped gently downward on all sides. An unmistakable feeling of dread wormed into my gut. The air was cold here, despite the day's humidity. A swirling mist lingered near the ground, thick enough that I couldn't see my feet. Banjo sniffed the air, whining softly, but he didn't run. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears. That was when I heard her voice. Megan. Clear, calm, as familiar as my own heartbeat, the voice of Angela, my sister. I spun around, but there was only mist. Megan, the voice repeated, from behind me this time. You left me. Why did you leave me? My eyes brimmed with tears. The guilt I'd tried so hard to bury came surging back. I'd been distant when Angela needed me most, traveling for a photography shoot. The next time I saw her, she was in the morgue. Hearing her voice now, in this twisted forest, felt like a knife to the chest. Banjo growled at the mist. I forced myself to speak, voice trembling. Angela? Angela, if that's you, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Footsteps padded behind me. I turned to see a figure stepping out of the gloom, Angela's exact likeness. Except her skin was pallid, streaked with something dark near her wrists, where she'd once cut herself. Her eyes shimmered with sadness. She reached out a hand toward me, but didn't move closer. I was torn between wanting to embrace her and wanting to run screaming. My rational mind told me this was impossible, that something was using my sister's form. Stay with me, Angela's voice whispered. Stay forever. I stared, tears spilling onto my cheeks. Banjo barked, a frantic, panicked sound. Then I saw the slightest distortion in Angela's form, as though her outline flickered. Her fingers twitched, elongating into rough bark texture before returning to pale flesh. I realized something was behind her, or within her, pulling the strings. My revulsion built. No, I croaked. You're not my sister. I lifted the tire iron again, though my grip trembled. Whoever you are, get away from me. A soft, mournful scream rose from Angela's mouth, her eyes rolling back. Cracks formed along her cheeks, revealing glimpses of something root-like beneath. The figure blurred, swirling like smoke, and reformed into a tall entity with bark-like skin and gaping mouths across its torso. Each mouth contorted in a silent wail, except for the largest one, which let out a breathy hiss. My stomach churned. This had to be the source of all the horrors in this place, the cause behind the rotting food, the vanished fishermen, the illusions. Jason's so-called screaming trees. The mourner, my mind labeled it, as though I'd known its name all along. The mourner advanced, branches or limbs creaking with each step, black fluid oozing from cracks in its bark. Its toothless mouths opened wider, exhaling a wind that sounded like a chorus of sobbing. Banjo barked and then whimpered, backing away. I tried to stand my ground, though every instinct told me to flee. "Stay back," I rasped, brandishing the tire iron. My voice quivered so badly I doubt I sounded threatening. The mourner's hollow eyes fixed on me, and I felt a stabbing pressure in my skull, as though the air itself had become a vice. Memories of Angela's funeral, of the accident that nearly took my life, of all my regrets, poured through me in an overwhelming flood. The mourner's presence was suffocating. It was as if it feasted on my pain. My arms shook, and I dropped to my knees, unable to stand from the onslaught of grief. Banjo yelped and circled around me, uncertain whether to attack or run. In that moment, I realized if I didn't do something, I'd become just like Jason, swallowed by the forest, transformed into a puppet for this creature. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself to take slow, measured breaths, refusing to be consumed. My gaze darted around the clearing. If the stunted trees encircling this place were the heart of its power, maybe destroying them would stop it. I fumbled in my backpack for the lighter fluid I'd been carrying, originally meant for a small campfire. My hands shook as I tore off the cap. The mourner seemed to recognize what I intended. It let out a furious shriek, an ear-splitting wail that made me clasp my free hand over my ear. Fighting through the rising panic, I hobbled to the nearest gnarled trunk and splashed the fluid. Banjo barked at the creature, trying to buy me a few seconds. Lightning flashed above, or maybe it was just my own delirium. I flicked my lighter, igniting a small flame at the base of the trunk. The bark hissed as fire licked upward. The mourner recoiled, screaming from multiple mouths in a painful, haunting crescendo. I turned, clumsily setting another trunk ablaze, splashing the remains of the lighter fluid in an arc across the dead leaves. My heart pounded, adrenaline overriding the agony in my leg. Thick smoke rose, carrying the stench of burned wood and something far fouler. Sparks danced in the gloom, and the flames spread, linking trunk to trunk in a ring of searing light. The mourner thrashed at the center, twisting its limbs in anguish. For a split second, I saw the face of Angela on its bark chest, contorted in sorrow. Then it disintegrated into a chorus of howls. The entire clearing erupted in bright, flickering fire, the trees screaming with the wind, or maybe it was my own mind screaming. I stumbled backward, Banjo barking at my heels. We fled, half blinded by the smoke, half choked by the fumes. Somehow, we found a narrow exit from the ring of flames, staggering through the forest without a clue where we were going. My breath tore in ragged gulps. The dull orange globe behind us pulsed in the mist, like a dying sun. When we finally emerged onto a gravel road, I realized we were on the other side of the park. In a daze, I limped along it, ignoring the throbbing pain. A loud pop echoed from behind, a tree trunk exploding in the heat. The screeches and shrieks gradually faded. If you like the video,
Minutes or
hours later, I'm not sure which, a park ranger's green truck appeared on the road ahead. Seeing it felt unreal, like a mirage. I remember stumbling toward it, tears streaming down my soot-streaked cheeks. The ranger, A middle-aged woman with a look of alarm on her face jumped out and caught me before I collapsed. Banjo whimpered at her feet, exhausted. I tried to form words, but I only managed to cough out smoke and sob. The ranger radioed for help, mumbling something about a brush fire in the southwestern quadrant, about an injured camper. At some point, I blacked out. When I came to, I was at a small clinic in a nearby town. My vitals were taken, my leg injury examined. I was borderline for dehydration and had smoke inhalation issues. Banjo had a minor burn on one paw and was treated at a local vet. We both survived, battered in body and spirit. The authorities questioned me about the fire. I told them it started during a storm, that I had tried to fight it off. I couldn't bring myself to relay the nightmares of the mourner and the illusions. They'd have locked me in a psychiatric ward for sure. A search party went looking for Jason. They found his abandoned pickup near the lake, but no sign of him or his body. The official record states he likely drowned or wandered off in the storm. Nothing in the official report mentions the stunted grove of screaming trees or anything supernatural. They wrote off my claims of creatures as stress-induced delirium. One paramedic said I was lucky to be alive, that my meltdown likely caused me to hallucinate. Yet the images of that bark-covered abomination, of Angela's face flickering in the twisted trunk, still haunt me. I sold my RV soon after. The idea of continuing my trip felt absurd. Whatever I'd been searching for, I lost it along the way. My camera gear remains locked away in a closet, dusty and forgotten. The nightmares persist. Some nights, I jolt awake, certain I hear that wail in the wind or the wet scraping of branches on steel. Banjo still limps sometimes, which is a bitter reminder of our ordeal. He's also changed, more skittish, occasionally staring at corners of the room, growling at things I can't see. I live in a small apartment now. Sometimes I think I should talk to a therapist about the guilt and the nightmares. Sometimes I force myself to believe the official version of events, that there was a fire, I inhaled too much smoke. My mind crafted horrors from grief and fear. But in my gut, I know better. Webster State Park, or at least a part of it, is tainted by something old and ravenous, feeding on loneliness and regret. I can't explain it in any rational sense, but I felt it, saw it. Angela's voice still comes to me in dreams, though less often. I like to think I found some closure by confronting that monstrous doppelganger, but the price was steep. I can hardly bear being alone for too long. The silence reminds me of that hush in the grove before the screams began. The only times I feel remotely at peace are in the bustling city streets, where human life hums around me, drowning out any phantom cries. Still, on windy nights when a storm rattles the windows and the leaves outside rustle, I imagine I can hear them again. The screaming trees calling my name. I know it's out there, buried under ash and burned trunks, but not gone. You can't truly erase a thing like that from the world. Maybe only wound it, force it into retreat. The wind doesn't scream here, in this crowded little corner of Kansas City. But I know too well what the wind can sound like. And deep in some forgotten patch of Webster State Park, I suspect it's still waiting, stirring the ashes, hungering for the next lost soul who wanders too far alone. I pray that lost soul won't be me.